you start to evolve it from digital gold to pristine collateral, it creates the internet economy. It's the only economy in the world that offers free market interest rates on its reserve asset, which is Bitcoin.
The extent to which you can prevent the stealing, I think it's coextensive to how much you can prevent the killing.
We no longer have to depend on a central bank to tell us what the price of money is.
Yeah.
That's a price control. If they don't want them to tell you what the price of milk and eggs are, you should not allow them to tell you what the price of money is.
Bitcoin, it's a weird thing, right? It's such a modern technical innovation, but for whatever reason, it's like accelerating people back towards very ancient principles of living.
In the Bible, the Antichrist has an economic system that you cannot buy or sell.
The mark of the beast.
If you don't have the mark.
Yeah.
Well, that is basically a CBDC.
Great, financial freedom, psychological freedom, wonderful. But then you come to this point, confronted with this, it's like an existential question. What do you do with all that freedom? How do I lead a meaningful life?
When you have respect for life and understanding of nature, even the miracle of food growing, if that doesn't blow your mind, then you don't respect what we have here. Bitcoin allows you to take a step back and respect what we have. And when you respect it, everybody lives a better life.
Okay, let's start with the big picture. You've said before that fiat money isn't just failing, but that it's fundamentally unsustainable. A way that I and many others have framed this many times before is that it's not actually money, right? It's debt-based money, which is if you understand money as the final extinguisher of debt, you can pretty quickly understand that that's an oxymoron, right? It doesn't make any sense. So can we just start with like this fundamental design flaw? Why is it that debt-based money, aka fiat currency, must always expand in its supply to exist?
Yeah, well, that's the really big question, right? That's the biggest orange pill there is, because you start from kindergarten learning about money, but they don't tell you that it's currency.
Yeah.
So I always like to tell people you have to know the difference between money and currency.
Yes.
And the main difference, the number one thing is that money can be a store of value and currency cannot.
Yeah.
And that's the failure of the system right now. Everybody's trying to be responsible, work hard, and save dollars, but the purchasing power of their dollars continues to erode.
Yeah.
And then that's really made possible by the abuse of the system. So a lot of Bitcoiners, sometimes they get triggered when I tell them, look, the dollar is deflationary. It really is. It's the abuse of the dollar that makes it inflationary. So if they wanted the dollar to be deflationary, they could take up the proper steps to do that. And the thing is you can't trust it, right? What did Satoshi say? There's a lack of trust. I love that he said that. He never said it's fundamentally flawed. The core principles are broken. No, it was the lack of trust and the continued abuse of the system that causes the problem. So we can never trust politicians. We can never trust governments. We have no precedent or reason to do that. Hence Bitcoin. We eliminate the trusts. We take that trust and we put it into core code that requires proof of work that allows and creates the savings technology. All right, that's really what makes Bitcoin, I like to call it engineered money.
Yes.
It's not just money versus currency. Gold is that natural money. Gold has that hardness. It requires proof of work to pull it out of the ground. You have the price discovery process of the cost of production and the gold miners being forced to ask for a price above that cost. And then over time, 1 ounce of gold was $20 and one really nice suit was $20. 1 ounce of gold is $3,000. One really nice suit is $3,000. How did that happen? Was that because there was an increase on the demand for gold? No. It happened because as the dollar was devalued, the costs of the producer continue to go up. And if the producer is going to remain in business, they have to ask for a price above the cost. That creates profit.
Yeah.
Profit is the invisible hand that drives the marketplace. And what's so magical about engineered money, not just natural money, because we've engineered this savings technology. We have upgraded gold, the hardness of gold that comes naturally in the cost to pull it out of the ground and the depth of and cost to find it has actually been upgraded to absolute digital scarcity. You can't find more. Like if you hear a lot these days, the gold-backed U.S. Treasuries. If we just back the Treasuries with gold, if we just revalue gold to $50,000 or $100,000, the problem with that is if you create artificial profit relative to cost, like if the government came out and said 1 ounce of gold is now worth $100,000, the cost to get the gold didn't change.
Right.
So what happens is Elon Musk is no longer going to be worried about Mars. He's going to be sending rockets up there to get all the golden asteroids that are out there.
Right.
Because the profit creates incentive and drives, it's the invisible hand that drives the marketplace.
Yeah.
And money keeps that true. Fiat currency completely eliminates that. There is no cost. There is no proof of work. You can just magically create dollars, but that doesn't create production. It doesn't create proof. It bypasses that step. And because of that, the costs start to go up. And when the costs go up, that's how gold preserved its purchasing power. They say you don't buy gold to get rich, you buy gold to stay rich.
Right.
What makes Bitcoin different than gold and a better form of gold, it's not just the natural, it's the engineered. You can buy Bitcoin to get rich. Not just right now because we're so early in the process that the emergence of the asset class, as demand goes against that supply, you're going to get that S-curve adoption and that's going to lead to a repricing event. That's one element. But the other element is its strategic design. The other element is the difficulty adjustment. When you take into account absolute digital scarcity, and then as the hash rate grows, every 2016 blocks, if the blocks are longer than 10 minutes, the difficulty decreases. That lowers cost of production, incentivizes the network to grow again. But vice versa, if blocks are less than 10 minutes, the difficulty increases, increasing the cost of production. That means Bitcoin miners, they have to ask for a higher price above their cost to maintain profitability. Otherwise, hash rate would shrink. So this relationship between hash rate and difficulty create this engineered element within Bitcoin that leverages the natural laws of economics and price discovery to drive value into the asset class. Because the more demand there is for it, the higher the hash rate goes. The higher the hash rate goes, the higher the difficulty, the higher difficulty, the higher the cost. So you can actually buy Bitcoin to increase your purchasing power over time because of the value proposition of the network. And I'm sure you agree, Robert. In today's world, in a world full of lies, a truth ledger is probably the most valuable proposition there is.
Dude, I think it's wonderfully said. And still, although I've been thinking about it, talking about it, studying it for 9 years now, it's still mind-boggling to hear it stated again, right? That it is... I've described it as a vortex of positive incentives that no one knows how to turn off, but it's exactly as you describe it, right? It's engineered to increase the cost of production per Bitcoin. And that is basically driving the market price higher. Now, a lot of traditional economists will say that's not possible. You can't engineer demand, right? Demand is subjective, valuation is subjective. And there's some truth to that. But the fact that Bitcoin is engineered to have the perfect monetary properties, right? It's always, I narrow them down to 5. People do different ones, but divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, scarcity. But it's also that has that ratcheting effect on its production cost every 4 years. That you have kind of engineered demand, right? You created the perfect money and you make its cost of production go up every 4 years, which means its market price basically follows. And that is truly mind-boggling. It's like Satoshi created an economic singularity of sorts, and every individual that is self-interested, which is every individual, so far as Darwin would tell us, will need to adopt this money in order to outcompete others, basically.
The most kickback I get on this is they say, well, if I go in my backyard and I dig a hole and it costs me $100, then the hole's not worth $100. So cost has nothing to do with price. Yeah. That's what typically the traditional
Marx's
economists
labor
come back.
theory of value.
Right.
Yeah.
The difference is that hole has no value.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a base layer of demand for this line of thinking to be applied.
Yeah.
And with Bitcoin, we see the base layer of demand of buyers growing faster than any asset class in the world. It's actually even growing faster than the internet.
Yes.
So we have a base layer of demand. It's going exponential. And because we know there's going to be consistent demand, we can now use cost-based analysis to understand the price discovery process. Just like you would with any other good or asset. That's the power of free markets.
Yeah.
It's the free market price signal. The reason that communism loses, the reason that socialism loses is because eventually they fight the price signal.
Yes.
And they don't know how to allocate resources because milk should cost this much. But then if there's an increase in demand of milk and the price can't increase, the profit disappears. When the profit disappears, the producers don't produce it anymore. Supply goes down. The price has to go up to create profit, or else the good or service will completely eliminate itself.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to meet in the middle there. You have to be able to say, yeah, you know what? Cost structure analysis doesn't matter if there's no demand. But when you have a strong base layer of demand, that cost structure analysis can play a really big role in understanding what's happening here. And that's what price discovery is.
Yeah.
Price discovery is, we know Bitcoin has value. We know it has immense value. We know it has a slowly growing base layer of demand. And we don't necessarily need to engineer the demand because the value proposition itself attracts the demand. But the cost, that's where the difficulty comes in. It's that one variable. If we push up costs because of the growth of the network, can we accelerate the price discovery process? Can we take that business cycle that we see the Austrians talk about, and can we leverage that to empower the holder of the asset?
Yeah.
And that, to me, I still am like baffled that was able to be figured out. And it wasn't one person, right? People will think like it just came out of nowhere. No, there's 70 plus years of computer science and history that goes into finding Bitcoin as that perfect engineered money.
Yeah, no, excellent. There's a chart. Maybe we can pull it up on the screen if the editors will hear this. Bitcoin's, I think they break it into like a 40-year history of the trial and error that preceded Bitcoin, right? DigiCash and eGold and all these other things. A lot of attempts at creating digital non-state cash, basically private money online, but they all failed because they were centralized. And Bitcoin basically put the ingredients together in the right way. There's not really, what's fascinating about Bitcoin too is that it's not actually novel, right? If you break it down into its components, all the components already existed. Satoshi just mixed the ingredients in the right way to create decentralized non-state digital cash. And it is fascinating. And I guess to go back to your theory, I mean, the vignette about digging the hole and why does that not have value? Like that's the Marxist labor theory of value, right? There used to be this theory that, well, value was a reflection of how much labor was put into it. And then you could say, okay, well, if I pay a guy to dig a hole and fill it back up all day, obviously he's not creating anything of value, but there's a lot of labor going into it. So that doesn't make sense. And that was the bridge to basically valuation is subjective, right? It's a matter of customer preference. There's nothing intrinsic to it. Mises said something like value doesn't exist in things, it exists in us. It's how we respond to the conditions of our environment. So there's nothing intrinsically valuable, even something as essential as water, right? Water is not valuable to a drowning man, for instance. And so, but the difference, I guess, between the hole in the ground and Bitcoin is that this thing, as you said, you called it like base level demand. And I would say that is base level demand that has been registered on the properties this thing exhibits as money, or coalesced around the properties this thing exhibits as money, right? It is extremely portable, for instance, right? It's extremely durable because it's decentralized. So it exhibits these properties already. So it already has that. And so once there's demand and there's a price, right, which means there's more demand for the thing than there is supply of the thing, so therefore it is scarce, it's just a matter of ratcheting up that production cost.
Yeah.
Basically spirals, this is the number go up technology, as Bitcoiners call it. And that, yeah, it still is stunning. It is actually truly stunning. And it's, what's the old saying that I think maybe Saylor said this, all your models are destroyed, right? All of Keynesian economics, the whole pseudo-scientific paradigm of Keynesian economics is literally rug pulled by this thing.
Yeah.
Because it says it's not possible, should not exist, can't exist. And Bitcoin's just like a big fuck you. It's like, you know what? Fuck all your models. I am the fastest growing asset in human history for 15 years running.
And I take that personally because I developed the Bitcoin fair value algorithm, which miners use to manage their treasury properly based on cost structure analysis.
Okay, tell us about that,
So when
please.
he says all your models are broken, this is a damn good model, but he's right.
Yeah.
It will be broken, but what's going to break it? And I think that's the catalyst that we're very quickly approaching.
Yeah.
We are going to move out of the commodity cycle. This cost structure analysis is the most effective form of analysis during a commodity cycle. When you go from fair value to premium, back to fair value, down to a discount,
Okay.
and then back to fair value, back to premium. That is the commodity cycle. All commodities go through it. And Bitcoin trades like that right now.
Fair value being production cost?
For being the production cost, because
Right.
there's no profit generated. So you
Sure,
can just
sure.
stay in business.
Right.
And what happens is we are going to transition. We are going to hit an acceleration point. They call it S-curve adoption.
Yeah.
And the one thing I think of is the motor company Ford. There was a famous picture they took where there's one Model T on the road and all horse and buggies. 3 years later, the same picture, same angle, one horse and buggy, all Model Ts. So as the Model T went up, the horse and buggy went down.
Yeah.
And that S-curve of adoption, I think we're very quickly approaching that, which moves us out of the commodity cycle, breaks my model, but then moves us into a money cycle. And I think that's where now we're going to get into credit and business cycles that drive value rather than the cost structure analysis, because it's a whole new asset class and price discovery process.
Yes.
It's no longer a commodity. It's now an
like
adopted money.
Yeah.
It's an
so
adopted money.
So is this when the network effects kicked in then?
I think that the network effects of kicking up to the point where demand. See, right now, I would say that hash rate chases price, or price chases hash rate. Right?
Okay.
The hash rate goes up, pushes up the difficulty, and pushes up the cost. So price has to go towards and keep going up towards hash rate. After this S-curve adoption, it's going to be hash rate catching up to price. I think the profitability of miners is going to go through the roof, and you're going to see an expansion that is kind of not expected because of the hockey stick chart that you see on hash rate.
Right.
But if you look at how Bitcoin mining affects all forms of businesses, especially when it comes to heat capture, I mean, there's some really interesting things when you can integrate. Like Peter Schiff the other day came out and said, Bitcoin's no different than digging the hole. Right. And it is, because digging a hole never added value to my balance sheet ever. And in no way can it ever. However, if I have a greenhouse in Switzerland and I want to grow my crops year round and I need to produce heat, well, instead of paying for heat, I can mine Bitcoin, produce the same heat I need.
Right.
But now I'm also earning dollars from that.
Yeah.
So I've increased my bottom
your own
line.
operation.
Bitcoin mining subsidizes business operations and increases bottom lines. Digging holes doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin mining is going to find its way into all types of businesses as hash rate expands, right? Because they're not just going to set up these data centers and just plug them in and let them run.
Yeah.
They're going to start to be integrated. And I think the guy in Bhutan just said that. Look, we have extra energy. We have clean hydro energy. Why are we not pushing the pedal to the metal? We've made $1 billion from this. It's paying for a lot of things. It's time to triple down.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to wake up to that, because the mainstream, we're burning the oceans.
Right.
But to the businessman, no, you're not burning the oceans. This is a win-win scenario. I get what I need, and then I'm getting rewarded for what I need. My business is getting a benefit. I'm increasing my bottom lines. So that extra element, I think, is how hash rate expands. It's not going to expand as we know it now with multi-million-dollar data centers with billions of dollars of equipment being thrown into it and just sitting there.
Yeah.
Like, some people will go that way, but I think the long-term growth of hash rate really decentralizes the network even more and pushes it into those businesses, pushes it into heating homes, heating pools, and all that stuff.
Okay, so you do subscribe then to the decentralization of Bitcoin mining out of data centers into business operations, homes, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that risk as much as some other people. I do think people like Bob Burnett, who are geniuses, rightly point out that risk. But anybody who's...
Why is that a risk, though? I thought that would be a benefit if it decentralizes more.
No, not right now. The centralization
that it's
risk.
decentralized.
Yeah,
Got
so
it.
they're creating templates. Mining pools have too much hash rate. The thing is, though, is you can point your hash rate wherever you want with the click of a couple buttons.
Right. Yeah, I don't buy the mining pool concentration argument either, because the switching costs are so low.
Yeah, I mean,
we've already seen it, right? When one pool
there's
gets too
no
big,
cost to it. You literally just command paste the new point, and you point at your hash rate to a new pool.
Right. And
so if the pool uses, you're safe.
And we have the historical precedent where one pool gets too big, we see attrition into other pools, and it fragments.
And a lot of the reasons these pools have come together is because of their payment schemes.
Yeah.
There's luck in mining. Sometimes you can hit blocks consistently, sometimes you don't. So they try to
Yes.
smooth out
Sure,
those
sure.
revenues with these different payment schemes. So
Right.
worst case scenario, get rid of the payment schemes. The results are what the results are based on your luck.
Right.
And you can easily decentralize. So I do think it is something we should pay attention to, especially as hash rate starts to go
Yeah.
parabolic. But to me, in the long run, I think it's a very easy problem to solve by just pointing your hash rate somewhere else and getting a good pool like Ocean to point your hash to, so you don't have to worry about it, and you start to get template choices. But as the network starts to go parabolic, people will start to think about that stuff more.
Yeah, I want to go back to that because this is something that I've like intuitively talked about in the past, but I don't think I had the precise language that you're using here. This transition or evolution of Bitcoin from its commodity valuation cycle to its money valuation cycle, right? Where it right now it's the valuation, the market price is tracking the production cost as we've described, but there's going to come a point where it starts just being an accretive monetary premium, right? That the market price way outpaces production cost, and it just keeps doing that forever, basically. My thinking, I don't know, maybe this is not the same thing, but just tell me what you think. I always thought that because Bitcoin has basically perfect information, right, in terms of its issuance schedule, we know what its supply is and will be between now and forever, basically. And I don't think we can say that about any other asset at all, right? Gold would be the closest proxy for this because it historically has the most slow growing and predictable supply. It's not an issuance schedule, it's a discovery schedule, but kind of similar for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's is basically perfect, right? You know, with, I don't know, a very high degree of certainty what it will be, and you know it will never be more than 21 million, right? And so you know that in more or less 2-week increments, right, as the difficulty adjustment changes. So my thinking was that if price continued to move subsequent to halvings, right, because historically it's like you get a new all-time high Bitcoin price roughly 18 months after halvings, and then you get a drawdown, trade sideways for a year, and the cycle repeats. If that pattern played out enough times, that eventually people are just going to start front running that thing.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, why am I going to wait for this thing to run up and chase it and buy it and, you know, get hit with a drawdown when I can just assume, well, it's happened 7 times, it's probably going to happen the 8th time. Or it's happened 10 times, it's probably going to happen the 11th time. And when it's a psychological change, and this is what's so tricky about money. Once that psychological inflection point is hit, then it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy because people start buying it in anticipation of it doing the thing again. And in buying it, they're increasing reservation demand for the asset and causing it to do the thing again, right? In the same way, contrarily, inflation, right? If you expect the value of the dollar to go down, then you're going to sell the dollar to buy anything else, thereby contributing to the decline in purchasing power of the dollar, right? So inflation and valuation, these are psychological phenomenon. And so I don't know, what does that land, and does that map onto what you're saying, is that there is going to be this psychological tipping point that's just going to drive Bitcoin from commodity into its money phase?
That is such a great point that you just made, because there's two realities here, and people have a hard time stepping out of the fish tank and kind of looking at the bigger picture. And I like to say it like this: there's the producer and the consumer. There's the lender and there's the borrower.
Right.
Typically, people look at it through one angle, and it's the angle that they're coming from. So Bitcoin mining gave me a big advantage, and I recommend to those people out there, get a hobby miner. You're not going to make money, but you'll learn a lot about the network. And what happens is the halving, people psychologically front run the halving, anticipating a higher price because the cut in supply to the block reward. But they stop there. And they just think, well, it's a pattern. I've discovered a pattern. Yeah, but what are the underlying fundamental economics of that? The halving immediately doubles cost of production.
Right.
So
For
for
Bitcoin,
a
of course.
miner,
Yep.
the cost to produce the Bitcoin on the halving without mercy doubles overnight.
Yep.
And then every 2016 blocks, you're getting hit with a difficulty adjustment. So it's a very tough business, but it's those economics that drive value into the price discovery process.
Yes.
And people psychologically see the price action, but I don't think they put 2 to 2 together to describe the price action. They rely more on this type of pattern thing. And it's the same thing with what's going on with the dollar. We see it right now. The psychological portion of dollars inflating has actually come down a little bit, especially with Elon Musk and Doge, because people look at that and they say, oh, I think we got a solution to this. But Doge has cut, I mean, even if Doge successfully completes its goal and cuts a full $1 trillion off the budget, we have a budget deficit of $2 trillion. And after you look, the deficit is a projection. Okay, like I project, like if you work on commissions, I project I'm going to make this much. The reality changes from what you project at the beginning of the year. So a lot of times our deficit is a lot larger. It's significantly larger than the projected deficit. Realistically, we're like at $2.5 to even $3 trillion of deficit, not the budgeted barely $2 trillion of deficit. So if you cut one, we're still at a $2 trillion deficit. Which means we have to
annual
print.
Loss every year.
Annual.
Yes.
And you know, actually Max Kaiser tweeted me like 2 years ago. We got put in Forbes for this. We called it the debt death spiral. And we said, look, if you raise interest rates, you think you're going to slow down the economy. And you will slow down the economy. But the economy is not the source of inflation. You look at Venezuela, they did a very strong demand destruction campaign in Venezuela. It doesn't matter. The economy only wanted water and food. All prices still went up because the source of the price increase was the abuse of the currency, not the economy. I believe the Fed made the same mistake. They are punishing the economy for the sins of deficit spending.
For their own sins.
Yeah, exactly. So if we can kind of... But that's the psychological twist. People say, if we can fix this, then I feel comfortable holding these bills, notes, or bonds at 3 or 4%. Because in the long run, I might gain purchasing power. And then the other thing that ties into this psychological warfare is the lack of accuracy within the consumer price index. The incentives behind CPI are so corrupt that it makes it what Elon's finding now with Doge look like fairy tales and fairy dust and everything's okay. I mean, that's how corrupt it is. And there's clear economic incentive to understate CPI. It goes into Social Security. If you use the 1980s CPI, which I believe is the most accurate CPI, we use that on govflation.com, it's over 10%. So if you look at 10% inflation and then subtract the 4.5% that you're getting in a U.S. Treasury bill, that's negative. 10% minus 4.5 is negative real interest rates. Well, the natural incentives created by negative real interest rates are exactly what you stated earlier psychologically. Wait a second, why am I going to save? I'm going to get less goods and services if I save. I need to spend now because I'm going to get more goods and services for my purchasing power now. So when the official numbers are telling you you should save, but then the reality is telling you spend because you're going to lose, we end up where we are right now, where half the world thinks we're going into a recession, depression. The other half thinks that the economy is strong, and everybody's honestly confused. Some of the best asset managers in the world are confused right now. My position is we are in the middle of the recession right now. And here's the difference. The textbooks will define a recession and everybody automatically, psychologically just thinks negative. Negative, negative, negative. Prices have to come down. That means recession. No. A recession is when your quality of life and your standard of living go down. That's what you need to be focused on. And we are in an inflationary recession. And if we don't make the proper changes, we will move into a hyperinflationary depression. Because our net worths are going up.
Nominally.
Prices are going up, but in real terms, right? Nominal terms, if you don't know what's going on, you might feel a little bit richer. But in real terms, you're getting poorer. And your quality of life and your standard of living are going down. So we are in the middle of the recession right now. And this all goes back to your first question, the money versus the currency. If you integrate Bitcoin, you eliminate the ability to trick people. Because Bitcoin then becomes that direct barometer, and it almost already has become that. We see a lot of charts shared out there by economists, especially Lynn. Alden does a great job of showing money supply, global liquidity, relative to Bitcoin price. So it's kind of already doing that. But when you make it official and you get a strategic Bitcoin reserve or you tie Bitcoin bonds, which I know we'll dive into, now you have a direct barometer on that. And I think that dampens the psychological warfare we see on the populace to control that understanding of what's really happening.
It's so. This is I think the most important aspect of this whole analyzing what money is thing is like you have to realize that it is an instrument of perception, right? Like you're looking through the money to perform economic calculation. And if that lens is dirty, then the image, the truth that you're seeing is going to be distorted, right? As we're talking about the difference between nominal and real, right? Oh, nominally, the dollar, my net worth is going up in dollar terms, but in purchasing power terms, you're actually getting poorer, right? That, I call it a cognitive optical illusion. It's like it's people are deceived into believing that everything is good. It's like that little meme with the dog and everything's burning down. And they say, this is fine, like people just think it's fine, but they're not seeing, I mean, I think people feel it, definitely. And the further down the economic hierarchy you are, the more you feel it. So maybe this is more so like people that are wealthy, that are experiencing this shadow confiscation, right? While they think everything is fine, but they're actually being robbed blind in broad daylight over time. And there's not an easy way to get people to get that. Like I've seen, for instance, like Thomas Massey, I've seen him be like, look, here's beer and here's water, pour water in the beer and you have diluted beer. That's inflation, right? Like I feel like that's about as easy as you can get with it. But it's something about the transparency of money and the fact that it is this perceptual apparatus. I often compare it to something like language. Like it's difficult to think about language because we think in language, right? It's difficult to think about money because we're thinking in money oftentimes. And so many people just default to thinking in terms of dollars that it's hard to take those glasses off and see the truth of what's going on, that you have distorted vision when you're looking at the world in terms of dollars. And so, that's like something I want to try to get across on this show, but obviously it's a mouthful to say it all. Yeah. Even though the principle is not that complicated, right? You're just watering down the beer, basically. Yeah. And calling it the same thing, right? You're calling it a beer when it's half water, half beer. Yeah. And clearly that's not true. So,
and the wealthiest people, they know this. This is why they do what Michael said. They're land banking.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Why do the wealthiest people hold assets instead of bonds?
Yes.
Like you would figure that they would keep everything in bonds and just have immense amount of cash flow. But instead they get the cash flow they need from their businesses or a specific cash flow portion of their portfolio. And everything else is pretty much land banking or finance banking or equity banking because they know they cannot keep it in the dollar.
Right.
But like you said, as you go lower down the totem pole,
people depend on dollars more.
They're paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Most people don't have savings.
Yeah.
I think that I read a statistic the other day. Most Americans, now we're supposed to be the richest country in the world. Most Americans don't have $600 in a savings account. Yeah. That's unbelievable. $600?
Yeah.
And what was the other statistic I saw? Most American families don't have more than $1,000 for medical emergencies. So when you're living paycheck to paycheck like that, and inflation is something that you see more powerfully over an annualized basis when you have assets, this is why I think there's a disconnect. Because we've built this economy into a consumer economy. And helicopter money has already been sent out. So if people are wondering how far along we are in this process, the helicopter money phase is typically like when you get to that phase, the warning bells are going off. We're approaching the end of the currency's life cycle.
Yeah.
And if there aren't dramatic changes in fiscal and monetary policies after you pass that point, you get to the death spiral.
Yeah.
They're going to try to raise interest rates, but when they raise interest rates, the interest cost goes up. So that's blatantly obvious now. But back in 2021, end of 2020, it was not obvious. And that's why Max got us into Forbes saying, look, you think raising interest rates is a solution. What you're going to find is when you raise interest rates, the next problem you're going to create is your interest cost. And now we're paying more on interest than we are for our freaking military. And we spend more on military than I think the rest of the world combined. To give you, it's over $1 trillion in interest payments. So now what are you going to do? You're going to lower those interest rates. But when you raise the interest rates, people sold off assets, got into the cash equivalent products to get the cash flow. And now when you lower those rates, where are they going to stay? In those instruments? No. they're going to flow right back into hard assets. And now you're going to get prices going up, not from inflation, because inflation is the expansion of the currency supply. Right. Now you're going to get prices going up because of the increase in demand. Now we're just going back to basic supply-demand economics. Yeah. There's trillions of dollars that have been creating cash flow on the sidelines. I think it's upwards of $4 trillion. When interest rates go back down, where's that $4 trillion going to go? Stay in instruments that create a nominal negative rate of return? Hell no. Right. They're going to go right back into those assets, and that demand is going to push up those prices. Yeah. And when you have an affordability crisis, what is the government? What's their only option? Print money and send it out. Yeah. And I love Trump. I voted for him 3 times. So I wanted him in there. And I think that America has a chance with him in there. But he's the one who sent the helicopter money. Yeah. He's the one that shut down the economy.
Yeah. And there's still, I mean,
there's precedent for him to send out more helicopter money.
And Doge and all these things, like, it's less bad than what would have been, perhaps, but they're still sending money to Israel. Like, they're still waging, like, the money printer is not going to stop. Doesn't matter who you put in office. In Bitcoin, we often dream about the idea of forming citadels, which are independent, self-sovereign communities that have their own energy, food, and water resources. Today, that dream is becoming a reality at the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a 705-acre regenerative agriculture community located at the Florida-Georgia line near Folkston, Georgia. The farm is known as the healthiest place on earth, and it includes orchards, organic standing gardens, regenerative animal pastures, berry fields, and much, much more. Today, the farm features 25 custom-built cabins and has plans to construct 225 more in the years ahead. The farm has its own food, energy, and water sources and is completely off-grid. So if you're looking to join a Citadel community comprised of sovereign individuals, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about membership. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on custom cabin pricing. Again, that's okefarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. iCoin Technology has released a slick new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a high-res 3-inch touchscreen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, and no GPS. It is an air-gapped hardware wallet which uses QR codes and a camera to communicate with the Bitcoin network. It has a built-in camera which is required for air-gap operation, and it has an optional Bluetooth compatibility. It's really a brand new user interface and user experience for a Bitcoin hardware wallet. iCoin makes self-custody accessible, easy to use, and non-intimidating. It even comes with an optional custom iCoin thermal printer, so you can print out the private key and its associated QR code when you're setting up the wallet. This makes setup quick and simple. Also, it is easy to restore the wallet just by reading the seed phrase QR code with the wallet camera. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like the iCoin wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. So go to iCointechnology.com/breedlove today for 30% off the purchase of this sleek new hardware wallet. Again, that's iCointechnology.com/breedlove. Helping people to start thinking in terms of these virtuous or vicious cycles, because what you're describing is this death spiral, right? That's a vicious cycle that creates the sequence of actions as a result of bad incentives and intervention that's not well thought out that leads to the destruction of the currency and the destruction of standards of living for everyone, right? It's a cyclical thing. Once it builds inertia, it's really hard to stop, right? And Mises has this great quote, right? There's no means of avoiding the final collapse of a boom brought about by credit expansion. Like, once you start printing money, you have 2 options. You're either going to keep printing it until you hyperinflate the currency, or you're going to summon the gumption at some point to stop printing it, which almost never happens. And you let everything crash back down to economic reality. So they're both bitter pills. And then on the other side, we have this virtuous cycle we're talking about with Bitcoin, right? Where the production costs are increasing every 4 years, thereby increasing the purchasing power of savers and lowering your prices, right? Like if you denominate, I saw the chart the other day, house prices in terms of Bitcoin are down like 99.9% over the past 10 years. You know, the house that cost whatever the number was, 1,000 Bitcoin 5+ years ago is like 5 Bitcoin today. You know, it's like just collapsing. So that's how you need to think about the world, is there are these feedback loops. And it's like, do you want to be on the one that's cutting against you and like tearing you apart? Or do you want to be on the one that you're riding the wave?
Yeah.
And that's how, I mean, this is like, I mean, money's complicated, but that's pretty damn close to how it works, right? They
That's
are
what
these
makes
spirals.
it so hard. That, and you and I share that same mission. We want to orange pill people.
Yeah.
We want to wake people up to this. But do you want the guy who studied electrical engineering for 4 years? Or do you want the guy who's been an electrician for the past 12 years? The experience. That's why they say Bitcoin changes you. You don't change Bitcoin. When you can actually use an instrument that you can save in, and you experience the power of saving, that economic incentive grows in you, and it changes your mindset and your approach to your capital allocation.
Yeah, your time preference.
But you have to experience
Yeah.
it. That's the hardest part. What's the trick? What can we say? What can we do to just get these people to understand that you need to save in Bitcoin? It's savings technology that will empower you. Yeah. And to me, I've come to the conclusion that it starts with the kids.
Yeah.
It really, one of my biggest missions here in Florida is I want to start a private school that teaches kids from the beginning, first of all, taxes and understanding business processes, gardening, self-defense, exercise, weightlifting. All these things are really more important than all the other things that you learn. Our curriculum is garbage, and we're teaching our kids from the start, then we're setting them up for failure. And that's where the bad side of this comes in. A lot of people say, are they doing this on purpose? I think originally my answer was no. But when you see the level of fight and aggressiveness and what they've done to the education curriculum, and you've seen it in the United States, we've dropped from being one of the top to one of the worst at the bottom. Was that by accident? I don't think it was by accident. I think that there was a strategic design to eliminate. That's why they never teach you about money versus currency. You come out thinking dollars money because you've never been taught the difference.
Of course.
So why are you not being taught these things from a young age? Why are we not raising up people who can become great businessmen? Why are we trying to raise up people who really become tax slaves?
Yeah.
And then and unfortunately, that's a rabbit hole that when you dig into it, there's a lot more confirmations in that hole than there is that we just made a couple dumb decisions over time.
Agreed. Agreed completely. And then it's not, again, these are bitter pills to swallow, but there's the saying that no man is better than his incentives.
Yeah.
And so for me, how could a society be anything other than that, right? A society is a collection of people. So if no man is better than his incentives, why would a society be any better than its incentives? So then you start asking yourself, like, okay, well, if you are printing money and destroying the economy and creating debt slaves, wouldn't you also need to create an academic paradigm that justified and supported that? Right? You couldn't say the truth about it. Surely not. You'd have to say the opposite, right? So this whole, like, I guess one thing that Bitcoiners, we're very adversarial in general, but I think one thing we would broadly agree on is that incentives are probably the most important thing in determining the shape of society and the shape of individual paths through life, right? That we are incentive responsive creatures, and we have a very bad incentive problem right now in the money. I want to go back to one other thing that you said too, just to try and clarify for people, because this is very important. You're talking about the difference between currency and money. You said that money will actually hold value or purchasing power across time, whereas currency will not. Can we just put a little more color on that? Like why is that? And how did we get into this money versus currency dichotomy? And then where does Bitcoin fit? Is Bitcoin money, or is Bitcoin currency, or is it both? How do you see that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because you can literally go back to the 1800s and you could start there. But I don't want to start there. Let's go back to like when gold was the foundation of the system, because I think that's where really Bitcoin's heading to, because they demonetized gold. That led to pretty much the monetization and financialization of real estate, which is why we see such a big monetary premium there. But what happened was those original paper notes were just claims against the money.
Yeah.
And that money was equity. It was value that already existed through proof of work. It wasn't promise of tomorrow's production.
Right.
And now that currency, I think it gained that exception. Like it fought that psychological war, right? Like, this is paper. I want my gold. Yeah, but when you use the paper, you can turn it in for the gold. And when you go to the grocery store, it's much easier. It's much faster, right? So you have that economic argument where, look, when you use gold, the monetary velocity is limited. Kind of like Bitcoin is right now. Like monetary velocity is limited. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when it's underpinning the system, when it's the base layer money.
Right.
Because now you have these paper units and you could very easily track. Look, when everything started to fall apart and other countries like France and even other Euro bankers started to speculative attack the dollar, they would just create credit out of thin air, borrow $1 billion, and then take those dollars and redeem them for gold. So you have like credit expansion then being claimed against a limited monetary asset. And it's like, you can't let this happen because now you're attacking the system. So when they removed gold from the system in 71, and I love the WTF happened in 1971 because you have all the charts where you can see the tipping point. But that's when currency, and you astutely pointed this out earlier, that's when it became a debt derivative.
Right.
It was a derivative of money. And it was just a tool. It was an L2 to increase the velocity of the money.
Right.
And it worked beautifully. However, when they detached the money and then put in this debt and the currency became a derivative of debt, it can no longer hold value.
It's no longer money.
Because, it can't be money because it's not a derivative of the money. It's now a derivative of not proof of work, but of proof of promise. I promise I'll be able to do this in the future. I promise I'll create this value in the future.
And herein lie the pyramid scheme mechanics, right? It's just layers of promises.
It's layers and layers of promises, and then those promises get rehypothecated. And this is how you get into a scenario where we are today, where you run a budget deficit. Imagine if we were still on gold, the government would only be able to spend what it collects in taxes. And that would be it, because as the debt grew, it would not be sustainable against that hard money, because it would be very obvious that, how many years is it going to take us to, debt to GDP is 123%. Japan's debt to GDP is over 250%. So you start to say, wait a second, if our economy keeps growing and does really well, it becomes a reality check. Like, we can't, even if our sons and their sons do this, we need to figure this out. But when you eliminate that reality check, that creates where we are today, where things have become, and that's the beautiful Mises quote, where it's like, look, you either stop it, and our leaders chose the opposite. They didn't choose to let gold stay there and let the system crash. They chose to detach the gold and quadruple down on the expansion of the currency units.
Dude, this is where it's so fascinating to me too, because, and this is not, I don't think this is an analogy or a metaphor. I'm going to say it like it's an analogy, but I think it's fundamentally what it is. It's like when you tell a lie and someone catches you in the lie, you need to tell another lie to cover that up, right? And then someone catches you in that lie, you need to tell another lie, and you're just building this house of cards. And that is the lie, right? Once the currency is no longer redeemable for money, gold, it's now a lie. It is a promise that will never be fulfilled. It was a promise to money. Now it's a promise that you're never going to get money. It's just a promise to promises ad infinitum. And that deviation, every time you print money, it's like telling another lie, right? And you create a fork in reality, right? There's objective reality that goes on doing what it does in thermodynamic, the universe basically. And then there's this like intersubjective social reality that we fork off with the printing of money. And it is very much, if not identical to that situation where someone tells a lie and needs to tell another lie and another lie. And eventually, as we all know the ending to the story, eventually it collapses, right? And you get the reconciliation to reality.
Yeah.
The lies collapse and you come back to the truth. And that's where you can start building on a firm foundation again.
Yes.
But there's no way to continue doing that. You can't do it forever because guess what? Reality doesn't care. Ayn Rand has this amazing quote. You are free to ignore reality, but you are not free to ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And this is literally the trap we are in.
Yeah.
And we're all screaming it from the mountaintops, and I just don't know what else we can say to wake more people up. And this is where I come to the bitter realization often. It's like, it's just going to take the pain and the time.
Yeah.
People are just going to have to go through the pain and the time and the experience to understand that they've been getting their face ripped off in this scam.
I don't think regular people are actually going to figure it out. But I do think financiers, lenders, market makers, they're starting to figure it out.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're figuring it out is because of the difference between commodity credit and circulating credit. So circulating credit is credit that's not backed by anything. It's fractional reserve banking practice. And that's what we see today. You can just create debt on a balance sheet and then spend those units into the economy. And unfortunately for the United States, we spend those units into the economy. It creates a negative ROI. So for every dollar, right now, for every dollar we borrow, we owe $1.04 or like $1.04.5. But we're probably creating like 70 cents, maybe worse. Like I might be a little too optimistic.
When you're this far into
we're not
the
even getting back
indebtedness.
principal. So if you're not getting back principal, how are you going to pay back principal? You need if you borrow $1 and you owe $1.04, you need to create more than $1.04
for it to work
in order for debt to GDP to be reduced.
Right.
But we keep borrowing the dollars, spending it into the economy, getting a negative return on investment, and we know that for a fact because our debt to GDP continues to become less and less strong and becomes more unhealthy.
Hence the
but that's
death spiral.
circulating credit.
Yeah.
When you go back to commodity credit, and that's what Bitcoin does. That's what I believe the future of finance is going to be built around Bitcoin equity as the most pristine form of collateral in the world. Because debt promises are not a form of pristine collateral. A proof of work asset with absolute digital scarcity that can be settled across time and space in 10 minutes with absolute certainty and security, that is pristine collateral.
Yeah.
And the Bitcoin credit market, commodity credit market that is being built and emerging right now, that is what's really waking up the top players in the world. The top capital allocators in the world are now starting to understand, wait a second, the risk-free borrower in the marketplace isn't the person with the printer. The risk-free rate isn't the person what the printer is willing to pay. The risk-free borrower is the person who's posting pristine collateral. Because if something goes wrong, I don't need them to print.
Yeah.
I have that 24/7 liquid asset backing the debt. And that's, to me, this is the biggest shift that's taking place right now. It's the evolution of Bitcoin from digital gold to pristine collateral. And this is what BlackRock, Larry Fink, is coming out and talking about tokenization of real world assets. Other big market makers, they all want to provide liquidity. Like Bitcoin's, a lot of people asking right now, why isn't Bitcoin's price going up? And because over 50% of the Bitcoin being bought is being resold on the futures market to go short.
Yeah.
But are they going short Bitcoin? No, because they're also buying it. So they're buying it and they're selling it. Why? What happens is these market makers, they become delta neutral, which means the value of your position, let's say they're making a market with $1 billion. That means if the price of Bitcoin goes up, and it doesn't matter because the value of their short went down.
Right.
So they're still worth $1 billion.
Yeah.
But what's left over are all the traders and speculators and hedgers who have to pay the premiums to access those tools. So they are literally yield farming Bitcoin volatility.
Paper Bitcoin. Yeah.
So this is not something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening right now. And as these powers that be get more and more into the market, this is what's going to accelerate us out of the commodity cycle and into the money cycle. And the money cycle is a credit-based cycle that is more akin to an Austrian business cycle than it is to the fake price-controlled stated rates of the central bank trying to tell us where we are in the cycle.
Right.
So it's
price
shattering,
discovery.
right? You can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality.
Yes.
The Bitcoin commodity credit market is going to make known the consequences of this reality, of this test and this experiment that we've had with fiat currency since 71, really.
Wow, it's fascinating. And it largely mirrors what we used to see with gold too, right? That's what debt markets used to look like on a gold standard. So it makes sense.
And a lot of people say, I get some kickback to that. They say, you can't have a credit market on Bitcoin. which is just, it's simply not true. You can actually have a healthy credit market on Bitcoin. I would go as far as saying you can't have a circulating credit market because that creates the results we have today.
Sure.
There's
like fiat
nothing
credit.
that keeps you, there's nothing that limits you. There's no source of forcing interest rates up.
Right.
And even the natural capital allocators who understand that component can't force the interest rate up because there's stated anchor rates. And when the rates start to go too far, like the 10-year going above 4.5, that 10-year was not going to go above 5% ever. And I was one person who was calling for it. I was one person who said, if we get yield curve normalization, the Federal Reserve will lose control of the long end of the yield curve and yields will go to 8, 9%. Could you imagine the prime rate at 9% and mortgages going off at 11 and 12%? The market's already frozen with a 7.5% prime rate. And then what happens is they can't let that happen because their mandate is stability.
Yeah.
So now they have to perform yield curve control.
Yield curve control.
And that
financial
means
repression.
Burr it up, baby.
Yeah.
Burr it up. So it feeds itself. Like you said, it's that negative feedback loop that keeps feeding itself. And what's going to break that loop? What's going to wake people up? I don't think the smaller person's going to figure it out because most of them are not using credit. If they're using credit, it's on a credit card at 30%.
Yeah.
You know, they're not borrowing against their stocks. They're not borrowing against their real estate. They don't really understand what collateral is and how you can be empowered by it.
Yeah.
But the big boys are now starting to figure out, look, I don't want to lend to the government. Or if I'm going to lend to the government, I also want to lend to these Bitcoiner guys. Because if these Bitcoiner guys screw me over, I have less risk.
Yeah, you have, as you said, that's a very interesting framing. It's risk-free, right? Because it's fully collateralized lending. And if the LTV or whatever it is drops to the ratio, you just seize the collateral and you're done, right? You collected the interest payments and you sold the collateral to cover the loan, and that's that.
It keeps you in check.
Right.
The value of the underlying collateral, the base layer money, keeps the expansion of credit in check.
In check. It is.
And in circulating credit, there's nothing that keeps you in check.
Right.
And that's the difference.
And the government used to be considered the risk-free borrower because they can always print money to pay you back. But as we touched on earlier, if they're paying you depreciated dollars, then you might be taking a haircut anyways.
Yeah. You're going to get your money, but you don't know what the hell you're going to be able to buy.
You're going to get your nominal dollars back, but you don't know what the purchasing power will be. Yeah. So you are exposed. There is risk, whereas there's not risk with fully collateralized lending. That makes a ton of sense.
And if you transfer that to gold too, because this is a big thing. I see Judy Shelton and a couple other economists, older traditional economists, saying we can just revalue gold. Well, if the price of gold, $20 an ounce of gold, $20 for that suit. $3,000 for an ounce of gold, $3,000. If you just say gold's worth $100,000, then doesn't the price of a nice suit go to $100,000? How does it magically not go to $100,000? You cannot revaluing gold is devaluing dollars.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
Right.
So we can't just magically fix this. We do need to adopt an engineered money. And what's interesting is you would think that those consequences that the economists talk about can't be avoided. But I think with Bitcoin, it mitigates that consequence because something magic happens. You can borrow this currency against your money. And think of Bitcoin as engineered money that is a value accruing asset. So you have a deflationary value accruing collateral, and you're borrowing an inflationary value losing spending tool, currency against it. And something magic happens. Over time, you actually become empowered. So I think the way we escape this is to do not just a hard, that's it, no more fiat currency. No, I think we have to adopt Bitcoin as a base layer money and start to fuse circulating credit with commodity credit. And then as the value of the Bitcoin increases, you can look at, some people say we have a debt problem. What if we just have a collateral problem? And now we have the perfect form of collateral. So integrate it and fuse it into the balance sheet to eliminate the debt problem.
And doesn't that become the speculative attack on the US dollar? Basically when you're saving in Bitcoin and then you're borrowing weak currency and then spending the borrowed proceeds to acquire more. This is the strategy playbook. This is...
I don't like the term attack.
Okay.
I think I would say it's called defense.
Okay.
Because we are not the ones. You're right. It is referred to as a speculative attack in the wider marketplace.
It is more defensive than it is offensive.
Yeah, we're not abusing the currency.
Right.
We're playing defense.
Yeah.
We're looking at the rules of the game that you wrote, and we're positioning ourselves to be empowered by those rules.
To be protected from the inflation, but in so doing, there is an offensive element too, because you're borrowing and selling the weaker currency, thereby contributing to the demise of said currency.
You have to be confident in that.
Yes.
And that's where the attack portion comes. If you're not aggressive and confident in your understanding of the engineered money, then
again, these are just metaphors that were, attack, defense. We're using like war metaphors to describe these cycles, right? It's like you're either being accretive or dissipative or whatever the opposite of accretive is. Get on the right side of the trade, right? Learn how economics works and get on the right side of the trade. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. U.S. debt just crossed $34 trillion. We're adding $1 trillion every 90 days. What does this tell us about where we are and where the end game is, in your opinion?
Yeah, this is, and to me, the amount of spending is just unbelievable. I'm sure your listeners, they know well the difference between a million, billion, and a trillion. So I'll save time by not going into that. But if you don't understand the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion, look up how the difference of that exponential gain goes.
It's 1,000x every time.
So it is just, it's astonishing. The difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion.
Yeah, maybe we could put up the visual. If editors are listening to this, there's a guy standing next to a pallet of cash. I think it's a million is the pallet. And then, 1,000 pallets or whatever is a billion. And then it shows a trillion's like multiple football fields. Yeah.
And I actually like time, because Bitcoin is that time and energy preserver. But the million seconds is like 3 days. Fact check me on this, but at a billion seconds is like 30 years.
There you go.
So million to billion is 3 days to 30 years.
There you go. Yeah.
And then a billion to a trillion is 30,000 years.
Wow. Crazy.
30,000 years. So it's exponential. And that's where we're at. We have $1 trillion every 90 days, but it equates to a $3 trillion, roughly $3 trillion deficit.
Yeah. And
people don't understand that when you take that and you keep compounding it, and then you pay interest on it, and don't forget about the unfunded liabilities. There's 220 trillion. People say, 34 trillion in debt. How about the promises to pay the unfunded liabilities of $220 trillion? And we have the helicopter money. We are in the final stages of this currency's life cycle. If we don't take the proper monetary and fiscal steps, which at this point are not responsible decisions, it is a radical change, then we will see hyperinflation. We will see a loss of trust, right? The trust trend is clear. You trust the government more today or more yesterday. Maybe with the new administration here in the United States, there's a little bit of a bounce in that trust, but the trend is very clear, especially on a global scale. And when you look at what options we have, you look at the United States of America and you say, what the heck can we put on our balance sheet? We have a problem. We have assets and we have liabilities. Our liabilities are outgrowing our assets at a pace that we've never seen before, that is unsustainable, that sets off all the warning bells and whistles that something needs to change. So what can we add to the asset side of the balance sheet to offset the liability growth? And the traditional economic answer to that is growth. But no, we're not getting growth. Our debt to GDP keeps growing. That's what's growing, not the economy. The debt to GDP is growing. So you can't take that dollar that you're borrowing and spend it into the economy and let assets outgrow liabilities. You can't take that dollar and spend it into our natural resources. Sure, you can tap into that, but it's going to take a decade or more to actually start to see some positive cash flow from that. What can you take the dollar and put it into to increase the asset side of our balance sheet faster than liabilities? Bitcoin, engineered money, because the faster those liabilities grow, the more faster the value is driven into Bitcoin.
Right.
Bitcoin on the asset side of our balance sheet in a strategic Bitcoin reserve can offset liability growth. And as we transition from commodity cycle to credit cycle to money cycle, it will not just offset, it will pay it off.
Yeah.
That's what we need. That's how important this is. There is no other asset in the world that we can invest in to put on the asset side of our balance sheet to not only offset liability growth, but to outpace liability growth.
Yeah.
This is a once in a lifetime, once in humanity, once in civilization opportunity to right the wrongs of our previous decisions and to escape a death spiral that should be inescapable.
Yeah.
But because of this discovery, because of this invention, because of this 40 plus years of work that went into finding the first form of money, the perfect form of money, if we adopt it, we can right the wrongs of previous generations. If we ignore it, then we're destined to enter into that death spiral where the quality of life and standard of living will fall off a cliff like we've seen in any other society that had to go through that experience.
Yeah, man, it's so accurate. Bitcoin as the invention of money itself, right? There's never been a pure money. There's never been an asset that's 100% monetary premium, period, right? It's just Bitcoin. And meanwhile, when we could be adopting this thing as a means of righting all the wrongs, as you said, we're dicking around with the XRP, National Cryptocurrency Initiative, and like all this stupid shitcoin stuff. It's like, I'm blown away. I'm not. I'm actually not surprised at all. But what am I? I'm a little bit sad for all the people that got their hopes up. You know, I saw a lot of people really getting their hopes up. I was at the Bitcoin conference when Trump spoke, and even Bitcoiners who you typically think are smart people, they get totally swept up in all the political fervor and like, yeah, it's really going to happen. It's going to change. And rah, rah, rah. And I'm like, just don't trust a politician because it's not going to fly.
I have two points. We're
going to get some version of it, but like, what version of it are we going to get? Do you think?
I have two versions. One is I think, or at least I'm honestly hoping.
Yeah.
I'm hoping and praying that this is the art of the deal.
Okay.
Because whenever you go into it, Trump is a businessman, right? And he doesn't like being told what to do. We said strategic Bitcoin reserve. He said sovereign wealth fund, right? You tell him one thing, he doesn't know. That's what makes him a leader. He'll listen to you, he'll learn, but he's going to do it his own way. So I'm hoping and praying that this is the art of the deal. And what do I mean by that? Trump can't go in. People hate this guy, right? That's why they call it Trump derangement syndrome.
Sure.
So he
something him and Bitcoin have in common, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Everything orange is bad. Yeah. So he goes in and he asks for a Bitcoin strategic reserve. What are they going to say to him? No, because they have to fight him on everything. If he goes in and says, you know, I want Bitcoin, I want Ether, I want XRP, I want Cardano, I want Solana, well, then they can actually come back and say, this guy's a fool. We only need Bitcoin. We don't need this other stuff. Trump is way off basis here. Even his followers are wrong on this one. We're going to say no to Cardano and Solana and XRP and Ethereum. And we're going to say yes to Bitcoin because Bitcoin is a commodity and there's no issuer of it and we should hold reserves of it. And then Trump goes, all right, that's sufficient. That's fine. Right. So they walk away thinking they're the winner. Yeah, we told that guy, he's a fool. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He tried to put all those shitcoins in there. We had to stand up and tell him, no, come back to reality. We don't need those in reserves. Now, if you want to invest into those with the sovereign wealth fund, then so be it. But when it comes to reserves, we only need Bitcoin. And now all those people who hate him think that they were the ones who said no, and they were the ones who put him in line. Meanwhile, he's laughing all the way back to the Oval Office because he got what he wanted. Now, that's just complete speculation on my point.
That's a really good tactic, and I've heard people say that before, that, often in leadership roles, you need to try to make people think it was their idea. Right? Like if you're bringing an idea into the room, it's like, don't bring it into the room and here it is. It's like you need to create the conditions that they can come to that conclusion on their own.
A lot of time at the state level, you'll bring a bill. And what we found is that as you lobby, you never bring one bill. You bring 4 or 5. Because if you bring one bill, it will take 3 to 4 times as long to actually get it heard. But if you bring 4 or 5, people, they love going, no. Oh, interesting. So that's the art of the deal. And I'm hoping and praying that's what's going on here now, because there's absolutely no reason to hold a cryptocurrency that has a centralized issuer with unlimited supply and no money characteristics.
We already have that with the Fed, right? Don't we have enough of that?
Yeah, exactly. We don't need the whole another 7 trillion
we already haven't finished
of printed
coins.
things,
we don't
right?
need any more. Yeah.
So, but the secondary thing to this, and I think this goes back to the monetary monopoly. It goes back to those who have control of the financial system. They understand the power of free market money, free market interest rates, and free market yield curve. That's the real financial revolution. It's not just about the money. It's about the yield curve, and it's about control of interest rates. And because they understand the power of decentralized finance, I like to call it BitFi, Bitcoin finance, because that's what it really is.
Yeah.
But I think that they did a really good job of taking shitcoins and making it about collectibles and art and memes and all this stupid, worthless stuff. And our enemies are laughing and celebrating right now because we allowed that to happen. We lost the bigger picture. We fought for the free market money, but we didn't want to fight for the free market yield curve and interest rates. It doesn't make sense. I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I self-identify as a Bitcoin maxi, and I'm offended if anybody doesn't call me a Bitcoin maxi. And if you think I'm not a Bitcoin maxi, let me sign my wallet address, and let's see who is more bullish on Bitcoin, okay?
Are those your pronouns?
Yeah, so I'm Bitcoin. So, but what does that mean? It means that Bitcoin is money, it's engineered money, it's perfect money, it's the first form of the discovery of money, and we don't need it again. Anything that competes with Bitcoin as money is a scam, and you stay a million miles away from it. But when you have digital gold, and then you start to realize, well, it's not just about free market money, it's about free market yield curve, free market interest rates. That means you need to transform, you need to evolve that gold into pristine collateral. And we can't increase block size to do that because you lose decentralization. So you need L2. Gold needed an L2. It was the paper notes. They worked fantastically. Bitcoin needs an L2. Unfortunately, it's been turned into meme coin, scam coin central and the wild, wild west because the powers that be wanted to drive it that direction. But in my opinion, it is okay to have Bitcoin as money, as savings. And remember, savings is not investment, but you can invest in some of these other L2 technologies or L1 technologies that act as an L2 for Bitcoin because it transforms it from digital gold to pristine collateral. I don't want to have to take my engineered money, my pristine collateral, and trust a banker as my counterparty. I'd much rather have smart contract risk where I can read every single line of that code. And if it gets exploited, okay, it gets exploited. That's why you don't save in the gas to these systems. It's just a gas. If gas gets wasted, it gets wasted. I was a participant in the explosion of decentralized finance. I wish I invested, but I just had put money in to play around, like all the people there. Everybody there was in the early days. Nobody was investing in DeFi. It was just putting in some money and seeing how these things work because, whoa, Bitcoin's getting a big upgrade. We're going to be able to have smart contract capability with Bitcoin as the collateral. And that's what it was about. It was about transforming Bitcoin from digital gold to pristine collateral. And it's still about that today. It's not about art. It's not about memes. It's not about collectibles. It's about taking this free market money and empowering the world with free market yield curve and free market interest rates. We no longer have to depend on a central bank to tell us what the price of money is.
Yeah.
That's a price control.
Yeah.
If they don't want them to tell you what the price of milk and eggs are, you should not allow them or want them to tell you what the price of money is.
100%.
And decentralized finance enables this. It enables this. And I think there's going to be centralized and decentralized solutions, and there should be, because the problems within the marketplace, there's so much nuance that you can't, it's like Sailor. There's so much, he has to have the convertibles, he has the ATMs, now he has the preferreds, because each pool of capital faces a different problem and needs a different solution to solve that problem. And that's what Bitcoin is, and that's what L2s for Bitcoin are. We need to get rid of this idea. Like, yes, be a Bitcoin maxi because nothing else can be money. But you know what? Be a freedom maxi and stop letting people tell you what the price of money is and let us build the technology and tools that we need to free the interest rate and the yield curve so that we can have a real economy where we can actually gauge when the economy is too hot, when the economy is cold. We can actually get real economic data to help us build a stronger society and move forward as humanity. We can't do that when you're using fake numbers.
Dude, amen. Amen. What a rant. And I've always found it to be quite hypocritical that we praise free markets so much in the West. But you know, I spoke at the ARC conference, for instance, in 2023, and I was talking about central banking as the central planning of money. I'm like, how do you guys, like one of the pillars of ARC is like free markets. And I'm like, why is no one talking about central banking here? Like, we have central planning in the market for money. Why are none of you talking about this? In 5 days, I've listened to all of you talk. No one's mentioned it once. And I'm just met with blank stares. And I'm like, I guess we're just outside the Overton window. Yeah. The people just haven't, and it's not complicated. It's like, we know central planning sucks everywhere. Why would we think money is somehow the exception? It's like, oh, literally fails everywhere but money, it's great. It's a great idea. It's just absolutely absurd. I want to go here, actually. So Henry Hazlitt has this great line in his great book, Economics in One Lesson. Government debt is just future taxation. Right? It's just resources that they have spent, created a debt, and will now need to steal from people in the future to pay for, right? Either via taxation or inflation. We already have Japan at 250% plus debt to GDP. They're kind of the canary in the coal mine. I think you mentioned earlier we're at 130%, maybe slightly above that. These are like end of empire numbers, as we have obviously touched on up until this point. What's happening? Like, where are we? People often say, what inning are we in? Like, how do you see this playing out? Are we just going to keep marching forward into this increasing debt to GDP until currencies start to hyperinflate and societies start to fail? Are people going to? You also mentioned some people are figuring this out already. They're moving over towards Bitcoin in certain capacities. I guess the optimistic view would be we could have some type of smooth transition or a smoother transition than just outright hyperinflation and social disintegration. Like, how do you see the future unfolding now that we're at or near kind of this end game of the central banking paradigm?
Yeah, and there's no doubt that we are in the final innings of fiat currency experiment. The currency life cycle is coming to its end. And we see that in the Dalio theory. We see that in all the precedent in history that we've seen. But in my studies, one thing I found is you cannot mathematically define hyperinflation. Like, the textbooks would like to say, 50% inflation per month, you're hyperinflation.
Yeah.
But
Mises would say you can't even mathematically define inflation, actually. Like, it's as subjective as value itself. Like, we can choose whatever baskets of goods we want to say are essential and track their price changes, but it's ultimately subjective to the buyer.
I absolutely agree with that because it's based on trust.
Yeah.
And as long as that buyer, as long as that consumer is still trusting the system, then they can continue to kick the road.
Right.
Now they'll lose, the status quo will start shifting faster and faster. And that's what we've seen since 2020. Since 2020, the rate of inflation has gone up significantly. They've done a really good job of manipulating numbers to keep the long-term inflation rate at around 4%. If you look at global liquidity, it's closer to 7%. But people don't understand that. So there's a disconnect there because they still trust. So if they abuse too much and people lose trust, you hyperinflate overnight. So there is no mathematical point. So I couldn't agree more with that. There's no mathematical point. It's the psychological point.
That's right.
Where people get bent so much that they just completely give up and lose trust.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that there is an optimistic scenario. There is a chance because it's not solely based on mathematics. We can have the 34 trillion of debt, the 220 trillion, and just these numbers, they don't make sense. But we can have that and still have an optimal and an optimistic outcome because we can rebuild trust. And I think if you take Bitcoin and you put it on the asset side of your balance sheet, you are now rebuilding trust. And there's no better way to demonstrate that than what we've seen in El Salvador. El Salvador has put Bitcoin on the asset side of their balance sheet. They didn't even do Bitcoin bonds, which I was really eager to kind of see how they were going to do that. I think they hit a few snags because, it does not make sense to issue Bitcoin denominated debt, right? Because it's the same.
Hard to
for the
pay back.
same reason
Yeah.
it makes sense to issue inflationary debt.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense to issue deflationary
course.
debt. You can bankrupt yourself.
Yeah.
So I was interested in seeing how they were going to do that. That played a role in our solution at People's Reserve. But putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet forced the banks and credit rating agencies to increase the credit score. Now, you would think a country that adopted Bitcoin would never get a loan from the IMF, ever. Now, of course, the IMF kind of showed their cards and is forcing El Salvador to make changes to their Bitcoin policies to get the money. But the only reason they're really giving them the money is, number one, they get to make the stipulations against Bitcoin. But it's hard to deny their creditability because their credit rating has gone up because the asset side of their balance sheet, the growth in that has outpaced liabilities. So it's just like us.
Yeah.
If we get a new job and you go from making $60,000 a year to $180,000 a year, your credit score is going to go up.
Yeah.
Because the asset side of your balance sheet is going to grow faster than your liabilities.
Yeah, your net book value has increased.
We can do that with Bitcoin, and that's what can grow the trust. So you can look at it glass half full, glass half empty. I'm looking at it glass half full because I think that we still have a chance. We still have, especially with Elon and Doge and the current administration, getting all of the waste, fraud, and abuse out of the liability side. How much of this deficit is actually waste, fraud, and I don't like the word abuse. Let's use the word theft. How much is waste, fraud, and theft?
Well, theft is 100%.
If we could, if we can get rid of the waste, if we can just limit our liabilities and turn it's like a kleptocracy, right?
Yeah.
It's just who can. If you're going to the piggy bank, I'll say that's okay as long as you let me go to the piggy bank too.
Right.
So we need to get rid of, if we can get rid of that and kind of limit our liabilities, at the same time add Bitcoin to the balance sheet and watch our assets grow.
Yeah.
Well, think of it on a personal level. If you start cutting your spending and making more money, then creditors are gonna trust you more. So I think there's a unique window we have here. As the Overton window is shifting, we have the opportunity to rebuild trust. Let's hope that this current bounce in trust is not just a bounce and a return to the downtrend, but is actually a bottoming process. And from this point forward, we could rebuild trust. And if we can do that, I think that optimistic scenario has a very high percentage chance of playing out as we transition from circulating credit to commodity credit.
It's fantastic. Just like I've thought about this recently, that there's actually a connection, an etymological link between the words trust and truth. They both are derived from a word that means something like solid, steadfast, unshakable, right? And you could think that the one thing people will always trust is the truth, actually, right? It's the one thing trust cannot be broken in. And so it's funny that you keep talking about rebuilding trust, and there's also all of this descriptive language around Bitcoin as truth, right? Like it's an indisputable ledger. You can't really argue against it. Truth has also been defined as like radical disclosure or radical unconcealedness, I think as Heidegger called it. And Bitcoin is that, right? It's this open source software. Nothing can be hidden. It's like a language in which lies cannot be told sort of thing. And it has all these very powerful truth elements. And then it's also very useful at rebuilding trust, as you're describing, in broader social systems. So it's just fascinating to see that connection. Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware's mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few strokes of the keyboard. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with zero lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with zero long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your miner's energy bill for the first week of each of your mining rigs when you sign up at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-sig vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which that have unilateral control over your assets. More than just security, OnRamp simplifies inheritance and estate planning, ensuring your Bitcoin wealth moves seamlessly to your loved ones without the risk and complexities of self-custody. Easily designate beneficiaries right in the OnRamp dashboard, eliminating the need for unreliable treasure maps or other complex key-sharing schemes. You can also avoid the probate process and ensure your heirs receive their Bitcoin securely with legal title transfers designed to keep your wealth intact for generations. As Bitcoin continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly access financial services, from inheritance and insurance to trading, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security. And importantly, the onboarding process is fast and frictionless. I set up my own OnRamp account, and it was far easier than dealing with hardware wallets or traditional self-custody setups. The team walked me through everything step by step, making sure I had a secure, reliant setup for my Bitcoin wealth. Secure your generational wealth with confidence. Schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team today at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. I want to ask you about, well, actually, before I ask you this, something you said earlier was like, I think this is before we hit record. You said instead of focusing on what the federal or central governments are doing insofar as their Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy is concerned, that we should be more focused in the United States at the state level, right? Like Arizona, Texas, et cetera, that are passing their own legislation and starting their own Bitcoin strategic reserves. Could you expand upon that? Like, do you see this then emerging as a grassroots movement and then eventually getting more serious at the federal level? Or how do you see this unfolding?
I love this question because Bitcoin is bottom up. It's always been bottom up.
Yeah.
Retailers have front run governments, institutions, hedge funds. It's a bottom up movement. And I think the marketplace is distracted right now by all the changes that are taking place. And it's actually a pretty good distraction if you ask me, because there's changes that I never thought had even a chance of being talked about that are actually being implemented. And we can actually get to the bottom of some of this money laundering and waste, fraud, and abuse and the consequences of that need to come down on the people who created those consequences. So that is really amazing. So and that attracts a lot of attention. And because of the collateral problem that we have, Bitcoiners understand we need the federal government that has the 34 trillion of debt, that has the liabilities outpacing the asset. They need it. I don't really think that's in the spirit of Bitcoin. I'm pro federal government having a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but that's a centralized federal government.
Right.
I'm more of a Thomas Jefferson guy.
Yeah.
I want to see this happen at the state level. And because decentralized local governments will actually allocate capital better. And they're more easily held accountable.
Yep.
So they will actually invest in infrastructure. Out of the $34 trillion of debt we have right now, I would love to know how much has been spent on infrastructure. And for people like you and I who have traveled around the world, where the hell is the infrastructure? This is like a third world country. Like, I mean, not quite yet, but it's second world for sure. People who think this is a first world country have not traveled to some of the other countries in the world. Our airports are crap.
Yeah.
Our infrastructure is crap.
The worst. The airports are the worst here.
It is absolutely, I mean, you go over and you look at some of these buildings. You look at the architecture. You look at the city. In Dubai, you could leave your wallet out on a walkway and come back like an hour later and it won't be there. But you know why? Because someone went to the front desk and turned it in for you. You do that in Miami, gone in 5 minutes, maybe even quicker than that.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, this infrastructure money we spent. It's non-existent. And I think we can fix that problem because we have a big federal spending problem, right? So you don't feed the fire, you starve the fire. How does Bitcoin help with this? Municipal Bitcoin bonds. That's how. The states need to understand, and they do understand. We see Utah, Arizona, Texas, like you said, moving forward at a faster pace than the federal government can move. And the states realized, oh man, if the federal government has a strategic Bitcoin reserve, we need to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But now the local politicians are starting to understand, well, if the federal government has a strategic reserve and the state has a strategic reserve, my city needs a strategic reserve. This municipality needs a strategic reserve. This small and medium-sized business needs a strategic reserve. And me as an individual, I need a strategic reserve. So we start from the bottom up and we create strategic reserves in the states. And now here's where the real magic happens. Some states, like here in Florida, you could have like a Naples, the city of Naples, very wealthy city, lots of money, lots of travel, high taxes on property. They have a lot of income. They have AAA credit. That's better than the federal government. The federal government's credit rating was actually downgraded. So you could get a AAA municipal bond with Bitcoin integrated into it. So when and there's such a lack of demand for municipal bonds that there's actually mandates. Certain entities are mandated to own them because there's a lack of demand. So what do we need to do? We need to create demand. And how do you create demand? Well, think about what the Fed did with the Treasury. They wanted to create demand on treasuries and suck money out of assets and put it into the cash equivalents. You raised interest rates because the higher the interest rate goes, the more demand for that product there's going to be. And ultimately, the demand should only exist if real interest rates are positive.
Sure.
So the real interest rate's negative, so the demand shouldn't be there, but it still works. Now, if you take a municipal bond and you fuse Bitcoin into that instrument, you're going to create a positive rate of return in real terms, not nominal. And that positive rate of return is going to attract demand from all over the world. Trillions of dollars of liquidity will flow into municipal Bitcoin bond issuances. And those local governments will then be able to take that equity and allocate it into their local communities. And that's important because they're actually held responsible. Trump says, drain the swamp. Everybody understands that it's the system. Okay, well then stop feeding the system. Let's drive that liquidity into decentralized local governments that we can hold accountable and make sure that money is actually invested in infrastructure, in education, and in all the important things that we need to increase our quality of life and standard of living. This, to me, the federal government strategic Bitcoin reserve is a distraction. We should be and I think it's not fair. At People's Reserve, we kind of have a little bit inside track here. But this is happening, and it's happening faster than anybody really truly understands. We will see municipal Bitcoin bonds from the states before we see the Treasury issue any type of bond with Bitcoin integrated into it, because the states, they actually need it.
Yeah.
They don't want to enforce the mandates. They want to actually attract organic investment. And the liquidity flows into those local governments. That money, there's going to be a lack of waste, fraud, and abuse and theft.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be held accountable. You can't hold the system accountable. And even if you try to, even if you get a person in there or an administration in there that tries to hold it accountable, the system will try to kill him repeatedly.
Sure.
And it's not the first time we've seen it, right?
And they have done it, yeah.
So that's what I think. Let's embrace the Bitcoin ethos. Let's embrace the bottom-up movement and start at the state level and attract that liquidity into local governments who can invest it in ways that the federal. You're always going to be able to solve a problem when you're on that problem.
Yeah.
Why should somebody in DC understand what's happening in Southwest Florida or in Northeast Montana? Yeah. You're not going to know.
What's occurring to me, like as you said, Bitcoin's always been bottom up, and it's really started with individuals, right? Like those were the first movers, obviously. So that's the smallest social unit we have, right? And then it's working its way up from there. And so we would expect to see small businesses, which we have seen adopted. Obviously, it's not a smooth transition. You get the MicroStrategies of the world adopting it, or the strategies of the world. But you would expect to see more adoption at more granular levels first, because they're more agile, right? They can make decisions more quickly. They can move capital more quickly. Probably the need is also presumably higher, right? Because you're further away from the money printer, right? You're not a beneficiary of the fiat.
Not a cantillionaire.
You're not a cantillionaire. And so you would expect to see them adopt first, and then through the grassroots kind of osmotic pressure, eventually the centralized institutions, the larger ones closer to the money printer, start to flip as well.
Well, we've hit a brick wall with small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. It's because of volatility. And that's what a municipal Bitcoin bond does. It smooths volatility and opens up adoption for that next ring up, which is the small and medium-sized businesses. So if you run a small and medium-sized business, you already know exactly what I'm saying. Because you imagine a case scenario where your business is actually growing, but the value of your balance sheet is down because you were buying Bitcoin. You're always buying the tops, right? You bought it at 100,000 and 108,000, and it doesn't matter because it's long-term. But now it's back down to 78,000 or 80,000 or 90,000. And your business is growing. You're doing more business, but the equity value on your balance sheet is down because of the volatility of Bitcoin. That's a huge blocker for small and medium-sized businesses. 99.99% of medium-sized businesses are not Apple, sitting on billions of dollars of cash that they can freely allocate. They need to take their revenue streams and reinvest them into the business. Hire new employees, increase marketing, get more customers. All that builds the business. You can't give up what builds the business and put it in Bitcoin and trap that equity on your balance sheet and then have to deal with the volatility of it. And worst of all, you can't use it. You can only hold it. That's been a huge blocker for small and medium-sized businesses. Enter Bitcoin muni bonds because these municipal Bitcoin bonds smooth out the volatility. And because it's a principal, it's structured as a principal protected note. So when you're a small business and now you take that revenue for the quarter and you buy a municipal Bitcoin bond, there's some magic that happens there. Even if the price of Bitcoin goes down, the equity value in your balance sheet doesn't matter because the treasury portion, the debt portion that's issued by that municipality, over the 5 years of that note, it matures at principal value. So let's say the municipality is going to pay you 4.5%, right? So they can shave some savings because municipalities pay upward of 6% or even 7%. So they cut interest costs. They get to issue at 4.5%. And what happens is they raise like $1 billion. 800 million goes into that municipality's debt note at 4.5%. 200 million goes directly into Bitcoin. Over the course of the 5-year note, the 800 million matures at a value of 1 billion. So the principal invested into the product is protected. Even if Bitcoin went to zero, as a small, medium-sized business, you've lost no money because your principal was protected by the debt note. But what happens is Bitcoin doesn't go to zero because it's strategically designed not to do that, right? The engineered money does what it's designed to do, and it performs. It pumps out CAGR that's uncomparable to any other asset class in the world. And what happens is that creates a real positive rate of return on the instrument, on the debt note. So now when you're used to getting 7% lending to a municipality. If Bitcoin were to maintain its 60% CAGR over a 5-year period, a municipal Bitcoin bond would pay 40% APY.
Wow. So all that upside goes to the bondholder.
All of the upside goes to all of it goes to the bondholder. Absolutely. And I think it should be that way, because you don't want to, what this tool does is it offers 100% downside protection with infinite upside potential. And that's how you drive trillions
What's
of
the
demand to
incentive
that.
for the municipality to cover that downside on behalf of the bondholder?
Investment. Because now the only investments they're getting right now are mandated investments. Very few people go, oh, today I'd like to buy a municipal bond. No, I don't know anybody who says that. But if they were able to create an instrument, and there's different ways you can structure it. It doesn't have to be a principal protected note. It could be a zero coupon bond. There's many different forms and ways to structure this. But the goal for the government is, let's reduce our cost basis to issue. So you can bring it down from 7 and 6 down to 4 and 4.5. So you're reducing your costs significantly. That's a big benefit for the local government. But you're also attracting investment that was never there before. You didn't have the option to issue a $1 billion bond because nobody would buy it.
Creating natural demand.
Now you have that. Yeah. So you give up 20% because you have to put that in Bitcoin, and it goes to the borrower or the lender.
Yeah.
But the borrower has the 800 million to now invest in the economy. And now you can invest and create that value to pay back the debt. And if you have a AAA credit rating like Naples or other big cities, you're going to hit a home run. But the small and medium-sized business can now adopt Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's the next step up from the individual. Why are they not adopting? Because of all the problems I just said. It doesn't make sense for their business to do it. We need these new, innovative, and revolutionary products to accelerate adoption for small and medium-sized businesses. And when that happens, there honestly, as somebody who tinkers in financial engineering every single day, I still haven't comprehended all the different ways it's going to play a role and affect local economy.
Yeah. Well, it's a massive unlock for capital inflow into Bitcoin for sure. That's fascinating to think about. One more quick question here, and then we'll do a break. Central bank digital currencies, it sounds like the Trump administration has squashed that in the U.S. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe you can comment on that. And then also the G20 just announced some global CBDC guidelines, so they're still trying to push it. Where is this headed? Are we going to get a central bank digital currency? Is it going to be in the U.S.? Is it going to be elsewhere? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, and I would say we already have a central bank digital currency.
Yeah.
Right? It's all in the computer. It's a centralized ledger.
Yeah.
We cannot track or trace the entries they put into the ledger.
Right.
And they control the price of the money through interest rates and stated anchor rates. This is a central bank digital currency, but the next step to the CBDC.
Yeah, the only thing they don't have is full control over the commercial banking system, right?
Yeah, and I believe it's that's the next. It would be getting the central bank access to the consumer instead of just the banker.
Right.
So bypassing the banks as the middlemen and going direct to consumer.
Exactly.
And then that enables your social credit score.
Yes.
And
exactly.
that's, just look at China to understand what the goals are with the CBDC. If you speak bad about the president. Or maybe if you speak bad about the president and they don't like the president, then your social score goes up.
Yeah.
But if they like the president and you speak bad, your social score goes down. If you jaywalk, you can't fly on the plane or take a bus.
Yeah.
It's about control.
Social engineering.
Yeah.
All
Social
the way.
engineering.
Yeah.
We don't need social engineering. We need financial engineering.
Yeah.
And social engineering is going to lead to more. It's the next evolution of the current system. So if you think it's bad right now, a CBDC is going to take it to the 10th power and give them ultimate power and control. And thank God, it does look like we are, at least here in Florida, Governor DeSantis has his anti-CBD bill. So that's really important.
Yeah.
And I think that can be adopted at a national level. You do not want the central bank to be able to go direct to consumers and then to implement social credit scores. Because if you thought COVID was bad and your ability to not make decisions then, if that social credit score structure was in place, people like you and I would be behind bars.
Yeah,
we would not have access to credit. We would not have access to banking services. We would not
for tweets probably.
We'd be thrown in jail for look at the rest of the world. It's happening. It's going that direction. I think the powers that be want that. So we need to do everything we can to inform our politicians of why it's bad. They should be mimicking and adopting the anti-CBDC bill that DeSantis signed into law. And that needs to, especially, we're the beacon of freedom in the world.
Yeah.
Nobody else is as free as we are. And we need to start to claim back that freedom. We've given up too much of those freedoms. And a CBDC moves that bar to a place where it will never return. If we lose that war, we will never get freedom. We would lose the war at that point, in my opinion. So I hope it doesn't go that way. But it's about absolute control of who you are. If you don't say, it reminds me of the Bible. In the Bible, the Antichrist has an economic system that you cannot buy or sell.
The mark of the beast.
If you don't have the mark.
Yeah.
Well, that is basically a CBDC. If you don't do what I say as the governmental ruler, you can't buy or sell. You can't go on the plane. You can't go on the bus. You can't borrow money. You can't have a bank account. That is something we want to avoid altogether. And Bitcoin says, well, you can do whatever you want. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
Just perform honest proof of work and deliver value to the economy, and you can have access to me.
Yes. No, that's beautifully said. And yeah, you get to opt in, opt out with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And that's the key feature is that CBDC would not be that. No. To be a forced opt in and no opt out, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin upends everything that state-sponsored schools teach us about money. For those who get the importance of Bitcoin, it is important that we have a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have pioneered the concept of roundups, which converts your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your credit or debit cards, and your usual purchases are rounded up to the nearest dollar, letting you stack sats on every purchase without even thinking about it. Coinbits also provides a terrific self-custody experience. Connect a hardware wallet for automatic withdrawals into cold storage to minimize your risk and stay sovereign over your Bitcoin. My favorite Coinbits feature is Coinbits Plus, which gives you the best exchange rate on Bitcoin. It even gives you real-time feedback on how well you are doing on your savings plan. With Coinbits Plus, power users can save more money to buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer cash and Bitcoin payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means Coinbits can help you do almost anything you need to do with Bitcoin. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that is Coinbits, BITS.app/breedlove. We touched on earlier that, Bukele's been buying Bitcoin. And then recently, I think he took a loan from the IMF. The IMF's trying to put some restrictions on what he can do in terms of buying Bitcoin, making Bitcoin legal tender, et cetera. I don't want to ask specifically about El Salvador, but I want to ask this more broadly. Like, how do you think the IMF and the World Bank are going to fight this bottom-up transition toward Bitcoin that we've been talking about?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure I've spent enough brain power really thinking about that. But to me, it goes back to that free market interest rate, free market yield curve, which is that bit finance, BitFi, decentralized finance. That seems to me to be the most important thing to quell. Because if you're the person who's naming the price of money,
right,
and you're the person who is establishing anchor rates in places all across the world, well, then losing the ability to do that would be your biggest risk.
Yeah.
Because that's where you get most of your power to do the social engineering and to do the economic engineering from. So if you give up that power, I mean, that's why yield curve control exists. Yield curve controls exist because they understand the power of losing control of the yield curve.
Sure.
So they have to do that to manipulate things and create sustainability and equity, and they'll justify it with all these terms and
all their code words,
all this positive thinking.
Yeah.
But in reality, it's socialism, it's communism, it's price controls. So I think losing the ability to state the price of money is what they're fighting against the most.
Right.
And that's kind of why Bitcoin's been able to do what it's been able to do. A lot of early Bitcoiners thought, Bitcoin's never going to be able to get to the point where politicians are going to be talking about having their cities or even their country buying it. But digital gold isn't really a threat to free market, to the yield curve, right? Digital gold is just a free market commodity, and they demonetize gold, and it holds no threat. You could still use it. Alan Greenspan looked at gold when he was there and used it as a barometer.
Yes.
So it's always going to, whether it's in or out or approved or disapproved or demonetized or definancialized, whatever words you want to use, it still can be used. So I think that's why we haven't seen a fight that much against Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's because it is what it is, and it's always going to be that, and there's nothing really you can do to stop it. But when you start to evolve it from digital gold to pristine collateral,
right, and
then that collateral is now jockeying for position with your debt derivative collateral, and you start to see that there's the internet economy, that's what I call it, like the intersection of all these decentralized finance protocols, it creates the internet economy. And the internet economy is the only economy in the world that has no debt. It's the only economy in the world that no one country can control or outcompete. And it's the only economy in the world that offers free market interest rates on its reserve asset, which is Bitcoin. And that, I think, is where the concentration of the fight is going to be. It's going to be on decentralized finance. It's going to be on the evolution of Bitcoin from just digital gold to pristine collateral. Because if they lose the ability to state the price of money, even in their mind, if they're doing it for good reasons, the consequences of losing that control can be catastrophic. So whatever justifications they use, I don't know. But I would think that the fight would be against decentralized finance more so than Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Just like the fight was against perpetuating the circulating credit market and removing gold from it so that that market could perpetually expand.
Gotcha.
But other than that, I haven't put too much thought into that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, at least in the El Salvador example, they're just using, well, El Salvador needs loan liquidity, right? And the IMF is one of the few lenders that can provide that. And so they're using the needs of El Salvador against El Salvador, right? Or at least as leverage points to say, okay, yeah, we'll give you what you want, but here are the conditions. You need to stop buying the thing that disrupts our business model, stop classifying it as legal tender, et cetera. So maybe as you're describing this transition into pristine collateral, that does put Bitcoin more in the domain of where IMF and World Bank have tools to fight it, right? Because, well, they are the fiat lenders of, I don't want to say of last resort, but they are. On this topic, I would always point people to the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Like they're basically using fiat credit to manipulate and socially engineer developing economies to serve developed economies, more or less. But those tools that they use to manipulate those developing economies would now work in the case of countries using Bitcoin as pristine collateral and things like that. So.
Yeah, it's a way to escape. And I would go as far as saying that World War III is financial.
Yeah.
The war is actually taking place right now, and the shots are being fired in the world of finance.
Wow.
That's why we see what's going back and forth with tariffs and investment and all these things. It always starts economically.
Trade wars.
It's the trade wars with the tariffs and the Japanese carry trade.
Yeah.
We see the bond rates in Japan they're starting to lose control a little bit. So are they going to print more money and do yield curve control? Like you start to see things unwind in finance before the things really start to heat up on a hot level.
Yes.
And we need to be careful.
Yeah.
Because if we get into that scenario, and I think thankfully we're so far along, I'm hoping that they understand that if they have to finance another global war, that could really end the trust. That could trust could die, and they could lose complete control.
Right.
So it's better to just let that war stay in the field of finance instead of bringing it to the real fields, so that they can control that, maintain that status quo and have power and control for a little bit longer. Than if they just let it go.
Yeah, I'm skeptical that escalation will be prevented. You're taking me all the way back to the second series I ever did on this show with Jeff Booth. And I hope I'm quoting him correctly. He said something like, currency wars lead to trade wars, lead to real wars, basically. And yeah, it seems like we've been doing the currency wars for forever, basically ever since central banking has been a thing. Countries are always sort of debasing against one another, and the United States wags its finger if anyone debases too quickly. And now we're in the trade war phase, or it feels like we're in it or headed towards it with the tariffs and such, as you've mentioned. And now, we already have some armed conflict going on, but that could obviously lead to escalation in that armed conflict. And I hope it doesn't have to go that way, but I think history would say that it typically does. So
I think it's interesting that when you look at the alignment of these, of what's happening right now, it seems that the European Union is kind of distancing itself from the United States. And you actually kind of have like this United States, Russia, and I don't want to say China, but it's true, because China makes everything and we buy it. So they need us and we need them, or else in both countries, quality of life and standard of living goes through a crazy adjustment. So there's kind of more of a natural symmetry between the United States and China than any other countries because of the economic relationship.
Yeah.
But then you throw Russia into that, and Russia kind of has that economic relationship with the EU. A lot of their energy is going over there, right? I mean, it was like that meme where the guy's riding a bike and sticks the stick in his own front tire and flips over and then blames it on somebody else. Like, you have to figure out a way to make it work. And then when you look at Ukraine and you see all of the sketchy things that were going on there, Ukraine working with FTX, hundreds of billions of dollars going over there unaccounted for. It just really starts to make you think, why is this happening? And we all know the military-industrial complex is a real thing, right? Presidents have admitted that. They've warned us about it. So we just need to be really careful on how we pick to choose our fight. And that's my favorite thing about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the peaceful revolution. We can actually achieve peace by adopting Bitcoin and letting Bitcoin be integrated into our current systems. And as the more you integrate it, the less power the power structure has. So I'm not sure we ever really had a way to fight the system peaceably until Bitcoin. And that's what makes me so optimistic about it, because it's the peaceful revolution. We don't need green peace, we need orange peace. So if we can get that, and I think we are getting that, then I think there's a chance where we can avoid it, and that we can all work, because now you can't exploit each other economically. Right. And when you take away that, and like you said, it starts with the exploitation and then it leads to the fighting. Yes. So if we could take away that element that enables the exploitation, perhaps we can end up in a way where there's peaceful revolution, there's economic agreeing.
Yes. No, it may be overly simplistic, because I've framed it this way as well. Like, if you can prevent the extent to which you can prevent the stealing, I think it's coextensive to how much you can prevent the killing. Now, look, I'm not saying crimes of passion will always occur and all that, but at least systematic killing at scale between states, warfare, and all this, it's over resources, right? So if we could stop the stealing, right, whether it's the printing money to fund the warfare or the taxation, we make taxation the primary means or the only means of state revenue, and then give people recourse to a hyper-portable, hyper-concealable asset so they can vote with their feet, right? If you overtax them, they'll leave your jurisdiction. That subjects the whole world of states and governments to something much more like a free market dynamic, where they need to actually be concerned for their citizens, the preferences of their citizens, and accountable to them. That sounds like a really, I don't know that it's an optimal world, but man, it's a step in the right direction. Whereas right now, the states don't give a shit, right? They treat people.
Well, they don't have to incentivize.
There's no incentive to care about people.
You have to incentivize.
You just milk them,
people.
and if they get upset and try to leave, it's like, well, you implement capital controls on them. They can't take anything, and that's okay. You leave all your resources, but you can go. That's fine.
I think a great example of this, maybe not on the country level, but on the state level, is what we see in Florida, where some of our politicians are starting to talk about property taxes. And it's like, well, wait a second. I buy this land. Yeah. I'm supposed to own this land. But if I don't pay my property tax, it's going to be taken from me. That's rent.
Yeah.
That is like the definition of rent.
Exactly.
So the state is not incentivizing ownership, and it's leveraging its own people to create spending power.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you see evaporate. The state will have to incentivize people when we're on a Bitcoin standard, because if you're not incentivizing, like you said, you just leave.
Yeah.
And then that creates, like you said, it's not optimal, but it creates a better world.
Sure.
Because when things are working for you in your favor,
yeah,
you're always going to have a higher quality of life than if they're working against you.
Just like in any other market, right? If the car dealer across the street is not dealing with you fairly, you go to the guy across the street. And it's that the threat of him losing his business to his competitor that keeps him honest in his dealing with you.
Yes.
We just don't have that dynamic between citizens and states, but Bitcoin does seem to tilt things that direction at least. Okay. We've talked a lot about the calamity that we are in or headed towards. We've talked a lot about how Bitcoin improves a lot of things, and maybe preventing this from happening again in the future, or at least not to the same extent or the same ways. You know, maybe we'll have different calamities. I don't know, but it's going to be, things are different after Bitcoin. How should individuals right now be thinking about positioning themselves? Is it just a matter of stacking sats and waiting? Are there other things they should be thinking about? What is, well, you mentioned you have kids, right? Like, what advice do you give your kids or young people more generally about how to deal with the uncertain times that we are in and headed deeper into?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think to me, it hits me really hard because my one son, Titus, he was a COVID baby. And for those first couple years of his life, there was no social interaction. And his brother, Noah, COVID was done when he was born. And those first couple of years, the social life was vibrant. Parks, playgrounds, play dates. And I can see the difference in progression between Titus and Noah. Titus is 5, Noah's 3. But Noah's social behavior and thinking ability is almost on par with Titus. And I say that to say this, that it's not just about money.
Yeah.
Money is not, you could stack sats. It's not going to fix your life. Honestly, it's just a number. At one point, the number on your screen, you're like, oh, it's going to change my life. It doesn't change your life, actually. It's just a number on the screen. What changes your life is community, the ability to produce. So farming, security. And these are like really important social constructs that if you don't have in place, it doesn't matter how much money you have.
Yeah.
You could be a Bitcoin billionaire, but if you don't have family and friends and community and security, your life is horrible.
Yeah.
Your life sucks. So we need to get away from. I really think this goes back to the education curriculum, because we're not taught you go to school and you hear about bullies and all this other stuff. Why aren't they teaching leadership in schools? Like, why aren't there leadership programs that allow leaders to emerge? And, Jesus was a great leader and the apostles were great followers. But now that Jesus is gone, you go back and you study what he said. You look at what the apostles said. So they were great leaders too. So leaders bring about leaders. And we're not teaching our children to be leaders, which means we don't have the proper social constructs, which means we don't have strong, tight-knit communities. Everybody's kind of like in it for themselves. And so my advice would be, use Bitcoin as savings technology to get ahead financially. But put down the phone and walk out of detach from the matrix, say hi to your neighbors, build community, learn how to defend yourself and your community, have a plan just in case something happens, God forbid. These things are of the utmost critical importance. Learn how to grow food. Most people don't. The answer that I get is like, why can't you just plant a fruit tree? If everybody just planted a fruit tree, because not everybody has the ability to plant a fruit tree and tend to it and take care of it and graft one tree to another. But seriously, why aren't we being taught how to do that? There should not be one starving person in this country. There should not be veterans who fought for our freedoms sitting homeless in the streets. And the reason that we have that is because the focus is on money. Because we're getting our purchasing power sucked away from us so much that if we didn't put all of that extra time and energy we had into money, and you see this in Weimar and other hyperinflationary societies, it all became about gambling.
Yeah,
it all came about like when the shoe boy tells you about his investing portfolio, right? The shoe boy should be learning about how to start his own business to hire other shoe boys so that he can produce value in the economy. Instead, he's trying to buy a stock or go into the casino and trying to get lucky or buying a lottery ticket. You know how much money goes into lottery tickets? That is evidence of a social problem. That is not evidence that people have some extra money and they want to take a chance. No, their main thought is, I can't get ahead in life unless I get a big sum of money given to me.
Right.
But that premise is wrong from the get-go. You can't get ahead in life if you don't have a wife. You can't get ahead in life if you don't have a husband, and if you don't have children. You can't get ahead of life if you don't have friends. You can't get ahead of life if you don't have a community that cares about your well-being. Those are more important than money. So that would be my advice. Understand money, leverage it to empower yourself financially, but being empowered financially frees you from thinking about money so that you can concentrate on the more important things and live a richer life.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And it's something I come back to often, right? It's like, okay, Bitcoin's amazing in a lot of ways, right? Obviously, it makes you financially free if you use it properly, right? You stack sats over time, you accumulate, and you enjoy the rise in purchasing power. There's also this psychological freedom that comes with it if you study it, right? Like all the things we've talked about today. I always call it they call it the orange pill, or you could say it's an unplugging from the matrix, kind of the same metaphor. And that's great, right? Great. Financial freedom, psychological freedom, wonderful. But then you come to this point, if you have been fortunate enough to enjoy both of these things through Bitcoin, that you are confronted with this question. It's like an existential question. It's like, what do you do with all that freedom? What next? What now? Right? Like, great. I can do whatever I want. I'm retired, or whatever you want to call it. I'm financially independent. I've seen through a lot of the bullshit in the world. I've deprogrammed and reprogrammed myself, or am reprogramming myself. I think it's a process that never stops, obviously. How do I lead a meaningful life, right? Where do I go from here? And it's fascinating, right? It's like just a tool, just a money, just a financial system, but it changes you so thoroughly. And it does force you to confront these existential questions. And I like the acronym BTC, because where I started going with this is like, oh, the way I've tried to answer that question is like, be the change. BTC, be the change you wish to see in the world. So it's like, okay, financially free, psychologically free. I see things in the world I don't like. What am I going to do about that? Well, what would you like it to look like? Be that.
Yeah.
Be that. Like, you keep going back to education. I think that's an excellent one, right? Like, let's teach the kids what we have been fortunate enough to learn. We've had to go through pain and go through the 1,000 hours of studying Bitcoin, or whatever the trials and tribulations were to gain this information. Dare I call it wisdom to some extent? Like, let's share that to the best of our ability through formal educational channels. You mentioned security, you mentioned community. Like, are these things that are there explicit approaches to this you recommend? Like, should people be training with firearms? Should they be training in unarmed combat? Should they be forming neighborhood watches? Like, what are like specific channels of action you would suggest for people in this domain of like becoming self-sovereign.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what the curriculum needs to be at the schools. Self-defense is absolutely. I mean, when you look at the world, and a lot of them don't like the United States, but one of the biggest thing in the United States is that pretty much everybody owns a gun. There's like over 100 million guns.
Right.
We have more guns than like the world's militaries combined.
Yes.
Just by free citizens.
Which has kept government oppression low here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you ask any of the people, like I've been on vacations and we've met couples who are from Venezuela or Argentina, and they always say, never let them take your guns.
Of course.
Never.
Of course.
And if you've never shot a gun before, it's just like Bitcoin mining. Like the pros that come from it are limited because in Bitcoin mining case, you learn about the network and that delivers immense value. But when you shoot a gun, you never want to have to shoot that gun pointed at a person.
Of course.
That's like your worst nightmare.
Yeah.
But when you do shoot the gun, you feel the power of it. You start to understand what it really means. And that's really important for a developing person. We have desensitized our children with Grand Theft Auto and video. I mean, I see video games where people just shoot each other. Fortnite, even cartoons shooting each other. It's violence, violence, violence instead of defense.
Right.
And then that gets you into this idea where why are cops being killed? Because kids are growing up being told violence is how you solve problems. But defense is how you solve problems, right? There's a lot of studies that show towns that have open carry have less crime.
Yeah, armed society is applied society.
So I think arms training, and from a young age, building a respect to the power of what that means to control a weapon and how it can be used to take a life. That's the thing. They've devalued life itself. They want to rip babies out of the womb. They want little boys to become little girls. What is that? What ultimately is that? It's a disrespect for life. And that's one of the things I love about Bitcoin, because it gives you that financial freedom. You actually start to look at life differently and you gain a massive respect for it.
Yeah.
It's something that's so special and so unique. And you hold your first child in your hands and you're just like, how? And it changes the way that you want the world to be. And in a fiat system, unless you find a way to deliver immense amount of value, which is very hard to do in this overdeveloped type economy that we lived in, where everything's been financialized and there's nothing new under the sun, right? So it's going to take innovation, and innovation only comes once in a generation. So for the regular person to be able to deliver value, the best way, in my opinion, to do that is to reject the ideas of that life is meaningless and that life has no value, and start to develop a respect for that life. And once you respect life, now you want to do martial arts. Now you want to do defense training. Now you want to learn how to grow a garden and help people who are struggling. Now you want to know how to form a community and defend, because if something goes wrong, you can't just, what are you going to do? Put your hurricane shutters on and sit in your bed with your gun? You still want to live life. You still want to experience things. So you have to develop community. You have to develop friends. You have to, and you want your family. So many families are broken these days. It's like, it's almost normal. Well, on my way here, my driver had a country song on, and it was like, broken houses are normal. Mom and dads fall out of love. And unfortunately today that's true, but I'm like, wow, this is going to music? Because music feeds culture, and culture feeds attitudes and actions, and it's like it's that deep rooted into our culture, and it is a money problem. I see you got Larry's book there. I love Larry.
He was here,
fix the money, fix the world. Because when you fix the money, we actually pay attention to the world. When the money's broken, we're so distracted by just being able to maintain our status quo and pay that next bill. We don't have $600 in savings. We don't have $1,000 for a medical. If something bad happens, I have to put it on a credit card at 30% interest. So with all of that going on, plus regular life, when do you have time to be the change? Bitcoin gives us time to be the change, and that is probably one of the most important things that it does. It frees us from that slave system and allows us to be the change and make those changes. And it's so much more than just self-defense and community.
Yeah.
But those are the things that I really care about, because I think they're the cornerstone of a strong society. If you can build on that foundation, it's like building on top of Bitcoin credit.
Yeah.
You want commodity credit because when the house of cards collapses, it collapses down to your foundation.
Right.
When you build circulating credit, there is no foundation. It collapses down to nothing.
Yeah.
But when you have self-defense, respect for life, community, an understanding of nature, and even the miracle of food growing, like it's unbelievable that you can put a little seed in the ground, a little mustard seed, it creates this big. It's like, whoa! If that doesn't blow your mind, then you don't respect what we have here.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin allows you to take a step back and respect what we have. And when you respect it, everybody lives a better life, because it's the people who disrespect life that bring down the quality of life and standard of living, that create the mass shootings problems, because they're just not mentally they've never been trained. They're not mentally in the right positions.
Yeah.
All of that, if we fix that, life would be better even if there was no Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But because there's no means to avoid the distraction that comes with the forcing of your devaluing money, we can never focus on those things. So you have to be financially free before you can start to focus on those.
Isn't it so interesting, actually, that the metaphor, even the language you're using, they're like, pay attention, right? Like, pay attention to how the world actually works, right? Like how food actually grows, how you need stable relationships with the local community. Fixing the money fixes your ability to pay attention to the right thing, rather than being just distracted or lost in this fiat delusion, right? That I can be a degenerate yield farmer on my phone or whatever fake fiat bullshit you're doing. Like Bitcoin, it's a weird thing, right? It's like, it's such a modern technical innovation, but for whatever reason, it's like accelerating people back towards like very ancient principles of living.
Yes.
A lot of people getting into ancestral diets, a lot of people getting into church, people starting families, people are stopping drinking, all these things that are like kind of classically good for you. Somehow Bitcoin is inducing people to move towards those things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a magic I haven't even really wrapped
my
brain around.
What is that?
It's wild how that works like that.
I mean, we could you could reduce it all to time preference, I guess, but I mean, I don't know. I guess time preference is just way bigger of a deal than we understand. Maybe
there's probably a chemical balance or switch in your mind when you're short time preference. You just a certain way of thinking is suppressed.
Yeah.
But when you're long time preference, those other ways of thinking, like, I don't really, maybe I have to struggle a little bit now because I have to grow this food by the sweat of my brow. Mm-hmm. But when I harvest this food and I feed myself and I bless another family, you get actual real reward. You get like a dopamine hit, like you would on a video game or something. Like people, but you get it from interaction with other. The dopamine hits start to go from personal to community. Yeah, and then you feel those effects. You see those effects in your own life. And it's funny because it does go back to what Jesus said: is treat others how you want to be treated. Yeah. Well, in a fiat system, it's very hard to treat others how you want to be treated because you're not in a position to do that. Right. But when you are financially in a position to do that and you start to understand some of these deeper things, all of a sudden it becomes like a big, philanthropy becomes a big thing for Bitcoiners. For sure. There are a lot of Christian Bitcoiners who are looking to give back with what they've been blessed with. Yeah. But you see a lot of fiat. I mean, like, who's one of the most popular fiat philanthropists is Bill Gates. But look at his philanthropy work. I don't know if that qualifies as philanthropy. Yeah, exactly. Some people would call it crimes against humanity. Yeah. So the definition of philanthropy under a fiat standard is much different than the definition of philanthropy under a Bitcoin standard. Yes. And I honestly haven't spent enough brain power on it to figure out how it works. Yeah. But it does baffle my mind. Because again, if you go all the way back to the origin of the word fiat, right? It was God said, "Let there be light." So he spoke order into creation, spoke creation into existence, which in Latin is fiat lux. And so every time man uses fiat, right?
use this money or else, follow this law or else. I think it's man playing God, basically. And that's why these consequences are so, Bill Gates would be a great example. Like, if there's a man trying to play God, I mean, I would say he's, high on the candidate list, to say the least. And when we just, I don't know, something about Bitcoin just taking you the complete other direction, right? Towards radical humility. This like playing God thing is like, there's a radical hubris in that, where Bill Gates is like, oh, we're going to block the sun and jab everyone and doctor all the food, and that's going to save the world. Like, maybe in his mind and heart of hearts, he believes that's good. But anyone from the outside looking in can see that that is certifiably insane, right? What do you mean you're going to block out the sun? Like, what are you talking about?
The sun we need to grow our food?
Yeah, where all the energy comes from? You want to, okay, you might want to think about that once more. But when you go, for some reason, going towards Bitcoin is just the opposite of that. It's like becoming the anti guy that plays God, right? You develop a reverence for God. And again, it doesn't have to be even theological. I often say, if you just want to consider God as the word for that which is beyond words, right? There's ultimate reality beyond description. So we're basically acknowledging our own finitude and humility when we acknowledge just the idea of God. You don't have to say it's a being or an entity or a sky dad or whatever. Just the concept of there being things that are beyond our conceptual grasp gives you humility.
Yeah. And ultimate truth.
And ultimate truth.
Because
Capital T, ultimate truth is always beyond words. Of course.
You can't, and that may be the actual final derivative. Is that the Bitcoin mindset is derived from truth.
Yes.
And the fiat mindset is derived from lies.
There you go.
And you have the energy of truth versus the energy of lies. Can it be a surprise that the society built on an energy of lies brings forth lies?
Yeah.
The derivative of the source.
You'll know the tree by its
source, fruits. Right? The currency, when it derived its value from money, it was truth.
Yes.
But when it derived its value from debt and promises that were broken and lies, the system broke.
It's a lie, yeah.
So maybe we can bring it back to truth versus lies. And when you build on truth, you always have that subconscious confidence.
Yeah.
Because like you said, when you tell one lie, you got to tell another lie, you got to tell another lie, you got to tell another lie, and by the end of it, you're like, I just want to live my life. Leave me alone.
Yes.
But when it's on truth, you get to enjoy the fruits of life.
Yes. That's a beautiful place to bring it to a close. Dude, this is an awesome conversation.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you for having it. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
And we kept going on so much. I didn't even get to tell you about our self-repaying mortgage.
I was just going to give you the opportunity. Yeah, sorry if I didn't give you enough time, but please feel free to tell us about what you're doing.
We had plenty of time. I have a bad habit of just going.
And then also where people can find you on the internet and find out about your work on the internet.
Absolutely. So thanks again so much for having me. It was a pleasure. It's great to finally sit in these beautiful orange chairs I see on the screen all the time.
Yeah.
If you guys want to follow along with what I'm doing, you can follow me on X. That's where I'm most active. Anything else is probably just something I've already posted on X from the past. I don't have time for that, so I mainly just focus on X. You can follow me at CJ Konstantinos and at People's Reserve. And one little thing I'll throw in there is that I do think, going back to the talk that we had with Bitcoin evolving from digital gold to pristine collateral, is that we're not just going to see it in the financial tools that we call bonds or the tools that governments use to raise money. We're also going to see it on the residential level. And that's what our self-repaying mortgage is about. It's about empowering those who have responsibly saved in Bitcoin to unlock that value without giving ownership. So, if for me, I bought a home and right now, the value of that home, I've lost $8 million. Well, I think Bitcoin's back over 90,000. So basically I would be $9 million richer today.
Oh, because you sold Bitcoin to buy the home.
If I just had this instrument.
Yeah.
So I think these are the type of instruments that Bitcoiners can be really excited about, because it's not just fixing the money for institutional players. It's fixing for money, like you said, from the bottom up for the individual. And when we fix it at that level, life gets better. Homes become affordable. Debt becomes less of a burden. And this all increases your quality of life and standard of living. And that's what I spend my time and energy every day doing. Very thankful for Michael Saylor opening up Pandora's box to financial engineering, and now taking that concept and fusing Bitcoin into credit and debt problems so that we can financially engineer new products that empower we the people rather than extract value from we the people. That is the future of finance. And at the core of that is Bitcoin.
Beautiful. Well, keep doing what you do, man. You're a great speaker on the topic, and Bitcoin's lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. Look forward to next time.
Next time, indeed. Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.